Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Mr. Storyteller. Before you dive into tonight's nightmare, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now, get comfortable and relax.
A chill wind hissed through the skeletal remains of leafless oaks as dusk surrendered to night over the isolated town of Raven's Hollow. In that uncanny gloaming, every creak of old wood and every distant whisper of nature seemed saturated with secrets, eerie and unnerving. It was on one such autumn evening that Thomas Ellison, a reclusive writer with an affinity for the macabre, decided to visit the long-forgotten Waverley House, a decrepit estate notorious for its dark past, to seek inspiration for his next work, a collection of true scary stories meant to lull its readers into a restless sleep. Thomas arrived in a battered sedan at the edge of town, its headlights barely piercing the gathering gloom. The house loomed in the distance, its broken windows and sagging porch exuding an aura of despair. Despite the palpable dread pooling in his stomach, he pressed on, determined to extract its haunting essence for his narrative. His solitary footsteps on the gravel pathway reverberated like the tolling of a funeral bell as he entered the estate. Inside, the house was consumed by oppressive silence. The musty odor of decay mingled with something more sinister, a taste of despair that clung to the very walls. Thomas's flashlight illuminated the path ahead, revealing remnants of a once grand life. Faded portraits of a family now lost, broken mirrors reflecting the dancing beam in shattered fragments, and rugs that whispered stories of long-past revelries. He set up his writing desk in what once might have been a study, determined to capture every detail before the creeping terror of night overwhelmed him. Hours slipped by as he scribbled frantic notes and half-formed ideas about the tragedies once hidden within these walls. With each sentence, the history of the house seeped deeper into his mind, a spectral ballet of misery, torment, and unanswered questions. As midnight neared, an inexplicable stirring in the air compelled Thomas to venture deeper into the mansion. Wandering through endless corridors, he passed a room whose door was ajar. A single dim light flared from within as if beckoning him. Cautiously, he pushed the door open to discover an ancient parlor. A grand piano, dust-choked and silenced for decades, stood against the far wall, its keys yellowed with age. But what froze his blood was the unmistakable impression that someone had been here recently. A set of muddy footprints trailing off into the darkness. "Hello?" Thomas called out softly, more to dispel his mounting terror than from any hope of response. The silence that answered was heavy, laden with 1,000 unspoken tragedies. Suddenly, a voice, hoarse and trembling, whispered from the shadows, "You mustn't be here." Thomas spun around. In the murk, a frail figure emerged, an old woman whose eyes were hollow yet smoldering with sorrow and a secret warning. Her pale face was etched with pain and regret. "Who are you?" Thomas managed to croak. "They call me Eliza," she replied, her voice cracking under the weight of years. "I was once a servant here, and now I'm bound by these cursed halls." Her eyes locked onto his with an intensity that belied her feeble frame. "This house," she murmured, "is alive with the memories of horror and betrayal. Many souls have wandered here, seeking refuge and answers, but they found nothing but despair. You write of truths, Thomas Ellison, truths that are best left buried." Thomas's hand tightened around his flashlight, and though his rational mind battled the spectral warning, his curiosity overpowered his caution. "Tell me, Eliza, what happened here?" he asked. Eliza's wrinkled hand gestured toward an antique mirror hanging askew on the wall. "Look into the glass and see the pain that echoes still," she said, her voice trailing off as if reciting a half-forgotten incantation. Compelled by an inexorable force, Thomas approached the mirror. As he gazed into its depths, the glass shimmered. Slowly, like the turning of a worn record, scenes unfolded. Fleeting images of a lavish party marred by a sudden storm, and then screams of agony as a fire erupted in the grand hall. Faces contorted in terror and disbelief, a man pleading, and a child weeping inconsolably as a figure, cloaked in darkness and disdain, stalked through the chaos. The images blurred into each other until, with a final flash, the visions evaporated into nothingness, leaving Thomas trembling before his own reflection, now distorted by a trick of the light, or perhaps by the remnants of lost souls. "You see what has been done?" whispered Eliza, her voice barely audible. Not by a mortal hand, but by curses born of pure malice. Thomas, now more intrigued than ever, pressed further. What curse? What secret binds you in these walls? Eliza fixed her eyes on a corner shrouded in shadow. Long ago, this estate was the site of forbidden experiments, occult rituals performed in the name of eternal life. A pact was made, a bargain with forces beyond our world. They promised immortality in exchange for a part of your soul, your essence, and then they took everything. Her voice faltered, punctuated by the occasional shudder. I was the keeper of that secret, and I paid the price. Suddenly, an anguished cry erupted from somewhere deep within the house, a cry that froze Thomas's blood. Mommy, it echoed, a sound so full of despair that it reverberated in his bones. Silence! A different voice roared, a deep, guttural sound that seemed to come from the very foundation of the building. You dare disturb what should lie in peace? The room plunged into darkness as the flame of Thomas's flashlight faltered. Panic surged within him as he fumbled to relight it. When the beam finally sputtered back to life, the apparition of a tall, gaunt man in tattered clothing stood before him. His eyes burned with a spectral intensity, and his voice was a chilling mix of authority and menace. Eliza, why have you allowed him? He hissed, addressing the old woman as he advanced towards Thomas. Eliza's eyes widened in horror, and she pleaded, Please, he's not ready to know. He must not share our fate. But the man only fixed Thomas with a stare that burned into his soul. Your fate, however, is sealed the moment you listen to what I have to say, he said, his tone a venomous promise. I have watched centuries pass in these halls, witnessed the deception and the agony. I am Morcant, once a servant of the ritual, now its eternal warden. I carry the burden of every whisper and every cry of anguish that has ever echoed within these cursed walls. Thomas's breath came in shallow gasps as he backed away, uncertain whether to run or to absorb every detail of this unholy revelation. Why do you do this? He stammered, his voice trembling with a mixture of terror and a desperate need for understanding. The bargain was forged in madness, and its consequences still bleed through time, Morcant intoned, stepping closer with slow, deliberate motions. I was promised power and longevity, but what I gained was an eternity of regret and torment. The souls of the damned, innocents and sinners alike, wander these corridors, eternally locked in their final moments of torment. I have no mercy for those who seek to disturb the balance here. A ghostly wind rattled the windows, carrying with it the muffled echoes of anguished cries and clattering chains. Thomas could feel the oppressive force closing in. The reality of the curse was no longer confined to the pages of a horror story. It was palpable, real, and terrifyingly present. Despite the fear coiling within him, Thomas's journalistic instincts surged forward. But why am I here? He asked, trying to steady his shaking voice. Am I merely a bystander in this tragedy? Morcant's laugh was bitter and hollow. You are both, writer. You come with your pen and your truth, and in doing so, you have become a part of this endless nightmare. His eyes glittered with a cruel light. I was bound by the pact to reveal your destiny, to ensure that the circle of torment continues. You, Thomas Ellison, will become another spirit trapped between the pages of your own work. You will haunt these halls, forever telling your story even as your soul is ripped away. The room seemed to close in around Thomas, suffocating him with a malevolent force. At that moment, the floorboards creaked as if under the weight of unseen feet, and shadows gathered in the corners, whispering and writhing with abandon. In a desperate bid to escape his impending fate, Thomas darted for the door, his heart pounding like a drum in a macabre procession. Outside, the mansion's facade loomed like the gaping maw of some ancient beast. Thomas barely had time to consider his next move when the surrounding air shifted with unnatural stillness. With every step he took, the oppressive memory of the estate and its cursed inhabitants clung to him, an indelible mark of the unholy bond he had inadvertently made. His escape was thwarted almost immediately. At the end of the long, winding driveway, Thomas found his old sedan inexplicably locked, its engine cold and silent as if it had surrendered to the night long ago. In the distance, a gentle, mocking laugh echoed, a sound both familiar and disturbing, as if whispered by an unseen spectator reveling in his torment. Your story is not yet finished, the whisper taunted, echoing in the darkness. You have only begun to peel back the layers of despair. Thomas's eyes darted around for a sign of life, of sanctuary, but the empty road and fog-laden trees offered no solace. His mind raced. Was the curse limited to the house, or did it now stretch its malevolent reach beyond these confines? Doubt and terror warred within him, each heartbeat a countdown to an inevitable confrontation with forces beyond mortal reckoning. Resolved to survive and desperate to understand the truth, Thomas forced himself back inside the house. It was as if the building itself compelled his return, the walls humming with an eerie invitation to unravel its secrets. Each corridor whispered fragments of memories, half-forgotten details of betrayals and suffering. The house was not merely a building, but a living tapestry of despair, woven with the threads of lost souls and broken dreams. In the heart of the mansion, Thomas stumbled upon a narrow staircase, spiraling downwards into a subterranean chamber. The air grew colder still as he descended, each step a descent deeper into the bowels of a nightmare. At the bottom, he found a small room adorned with occult symbols and relics of the arcane. In the center of the room lay a heavy, leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age, its script penned in a hurried, almost frantic hand. As Thomas flipped through the journal, he realized it chronicled the events leading up to the catastrophic ritual, detailed accounts of forbidden rites, desperate promises, and the slow unraveling of morality. The entries spoke of a mysterious figure known only as the Curator, whose descent into madness had driven the family and its servants into a spiral of unspeakable horrors. One entry, scrawled in crimson ink, as if with the writer's own blood, read, "The bargain is sealed tonight. We offer our souls in exchange for the forbidden knowledge promised by darkness. The house shall remember, and the sins of the past shall no longer be silent." Thomas's hands trembled as he read, and the oppressive dread of those words hammered his heart with each passing moment. A soft creak echoed behind him, and before he could turn, the figure of Eliza appeared once more at the doorway, her eyes brimming with sorrow and resignation. "Thomas," she said, her voice quivering, "you must leave before the night swallows you whole. The ritual, it is not yet complete. Each night, the cursed souls plead for freedom. But freedom here comes only with sacrifice. Look around you. The house demands a living soul to appease its insatiable thirst for retribution." "But why me?" Thomas demanded, voice raw with anguish and confusion. "I'm just a writer, an observer. How can I bear this curse?" Eliza's answer was a broken whisper as she retreated into the darkness. "You see, we all have our roles in this endless cycle of horror. Some are cursed by their own sins, and others are doomed by the mere act of seeking the truth. Your words have power, Thomas, and the dark forces have marked you as their chronicler." Before he could protest further, a blood-curdling scream tore through the silence, a sound that resonated deep in his soul. Thomas bolted from the chamber, following the cacophony of despair as it guided him through twisting hallways that seemed to shift and warp with each agonizing minute. At last, he arrived at a chamber that had once served as a nursery. Broken toys, shredded by time, lay scattered across a threadbare rug. In one corner, a spectral child hovered, its eyes reflecting centuries of sorrow. The child reached out to him with a voice that was barely a wail. "Help me, please help me." Overwhelmed by the child's pitiful despair, Thomas knelt, his own terror momentarily subsiding into compassionate empathy. "I want to help," he murmured softly, "but I don't know how." In reply, the child's form wavered and morphed into the spectral visage of a grieving mother, her expression etched with the agony of loss. "The curse, it binds us all," the apparition intoned. "Only by telling our true stories can we cast off these chains. But be warned, truth comes at a cost. Once you have set our stories free, you may never escape their burden yourself." Thomas's mind whirled. The realization sank deep. His desire to document reality had entangled him in a sinister web, a web where every word written was another link in the chain that tethered these souls to eternal torment. For what felt like an eternity, Thomas wandered the cursed halls, witnessing whispers of the past. In every room, he encountered fragments of life, the anguished pleadings of a man begging for mercy in a forgotten corner, the lament of a woman whose eyes overflowed with tears for a love lost to cruelty and fire, and even the hollow silence of those who had long ceased to exist. With each encounter, the burden of their horrors grew heavier, and the line between observer and victim blurred to the point of non-existence. At one point, he found himself in a grand dining hall where the table was set for a long-dead feast. The clink of silverware and the murmur of voices filled the air, an eerie reenactment of a final doomed banquet. A tall, stern figure with a voice like ice commanded, "Sit and bear witness." Thomas, trapped in a paralyzing mixture of dread and fascination, joined the spectral congregation. As he sat, the room's temperature dropped further, and each chilling dialogue from the apparitions etched itself into his memory like a dark prophecy. "Do you recall the promises made in the dead of night?" one specter demanded of another, its tone accusatory and filled with old grievances. "We were told that eternity would be ours, yet here we remain prisoners in torment." A woman's sorrowful reply trembled in the cold air. "I believed in redemption, but now all I see is the endless echo of lies." Their voices overlapped in a crescendo of despair that threatened to drown Thomas's will to live. In that moment, he understood that the Waverly House was not merely haunted by restless spirits. It was a labyrinth of cursed memories, where every lost soul was compelled to relive their darkest hours, forever enmeshed in a sorrowful narrative from which there was no escape. Determined to break the cycle, Thomas resolved to document each tortured soul's lament, as if by doing so, he might set them free. He scrawled feverishly in his journal, capturing every nuance of their pain, every whispered secret, every chilling admission of despair. True Scary Stories to Fall Asleep would not be just a collection of ghostly fables, but a chronicle of lives ruined by dark promises and shattered fates. It would be a tribute to those ensnared by the house's curse, a desperate bid to bring their hidden tragedies to light, even if it meant condemning himself in the process. Hours later, as the first pale fingers of dawn began to claw at the horizon, Thomas sat amidst scattered pages, his eyes red-rimmed and his spirit battered. The house around him was now bathed in the muted gray of early morning, a fragile interlude between endless night and the harsh daylight that threatened to expose the truth of its horrors. In that fragile moment, Thomas realized that he had not merely recorded the stories of the damned, he had become one of them. A sudden, disembodied voice echoed from the shadows of the doorway. "It is done now," it declared, resonating with both finality and sorrow. Morcant, whose presence had grown more ominous with each passing hour, emerged from behind a tattered curtain of shadow. His eyes glowed with a grim satisfaction as he gazed upon the scattered writings, now soaked in the metaphorical blood of revelation. "You have given them voice," he murmured, almost gently, "but know that the price of truth is eternal suffering." In that instance, as the spectral inhabitants of the mansion gathered around, their eyes imploring, condemning, and thanking him all at once, Thomas felt a profound shift within. The journal he had so meticulously compiled shivered in his trembling hands as if alive with the unspent sorrow of centuries. With a voice barely audible, he replied, "If my words can bring the world to understand the depth of your pain, then perhaps your torment will end, even if I must bear its weight forever." A silence fell. A silence filled with centuries of grief and the heavy promise of inevitable retribution. Then, from the depths of his own fading consciousness, Thomas heard a whisper that could have been his own thoughts or those of another tortured soul. "There is no escape from your own story." As the day broke fully, the spectral figures began to fade with the rising sun, leaving behind only their whispered memories and the lingering chill of a night filled with unspeakable horror. Thomas staggered out of the Waverly House, each step resonating with the unyielding echo of the lives he had encountered. The cursed estate receded into the distance behind him, its silhouette a dark reminder of what he had seen and what he had become part of. Years later, Thomas would come to be known as the chronicler of Raven's Hollow, a man whose writings were said to have the power to conjure the darkest corners of the human soul and reveal the hidden truths that lurk behind the comforting facade of sleep. Readers of True Scary Stories to Fall Asleep would find themselves haunted by the sorrowful voices and chilling recollections, each word a reminder that some truths are too terrible to ever be forgotten. But even as acclaim followed his unnerving work, Thomas bore the everlasting burden of that cursed night, a burden that manifested in quiet moments, a distant scream on a restless evening, or the sudden reflection of his own haunted eyes in a darkened window. Late at night, when the wind whispered secrets among the trees and shadows danced in the corners of his study, Thomas could almost hear the spectral dialogues continuing their endless lament. "Remember us," they would say, or "Our sorrow is endless." And in those moments he would smile sadly, knowing that his destiny was inextricably intertwined with the anguished memories of Raven's Hollow. The house had claimed him, body and soul, a living testament to the true terror of the human condition, a terror that lay not in monstrous apparitions alone, but in the quiet despair of souls lost to their own unspoken truths. In his final days, when the line between waking and dreaming became indistinguishable, Thomas often wondered if his ceaseless quest for truth had been a curse disguised as destiny. And though he longed for release, he knew the stories he had written, each one a fragment of an unending nightmare, would serve as a warning to others that some secrets are too dangerous to illuminate, and that to seek the truth in darkness is to invite an eternal night into one's own soul. And so, every night, as the world slumbered unaware of the sinister forces that lurked beneath their quiet dreams, Thomas Ellison's voice echoed through the whispered memories of Raven's Hollow, a chilling reminder that the cost of truth is borne not only by the living, but by the dead as well. His words, etched in sorrow and tainted with despair, called out to those brave enough or foolish enough to listen. The true horror lies not in the monsters under the bed, but in the relentless, unyielding ghosts of our past that never let us forget the price we pay for seeking them out.
Story number 2.
A bitter wind blew across the barren landscape as nightfall draped its black cloak over the abandoned Ashmore Asylum, a crumbling relic of forgotten suffering and despair. Its once sterile halls, now decayed and overgrown with ivy, whispered tales of unspeakable horrors and secrets locked away for decades. Tonight, the asylum would awaken from its slumber, beckoning a troubled soul to face the dark legacy buried within its walls. Evelyn Carter had heard the rumors before. A respected investigative journalist with an appetite for uncovering hidden truths, she had seen the asylum's reputation as nothing more than a relic of urban legend, a building cursed with a history of violent treatments and inexplicable disappearances of both patients and staff. But as she drove through a fog-choked road leading to Ashmore, a chill crept up her spine. The building's stark silhouette, punctuated by shattered windows and collapsed dormitories, seemed almost to breathe in the pale moonlight. Determined yet apprehensive, Evelyn stepped out of her car, her boots crunching against dead leaves and gravel. The oppressive air was thick with dread. Every creak of the wind against the dilapidated structure echoed like a sinister prelude to a long-forgotten dirge. Clutching her recorder and notepad, she pressed open the heavy, rusted gate, its screech splitting the silence. Inside, the asylum was shrouded in layers of decay. Peeling wallpaper, broken fixtures, and the lingering odor of antiseptic and rot greeted her. Flickering emergency lights, long since unmaintained, cast eerie shadows along endless corridors. With each step, her heartbeat pounded louder, as if warning her to flee. Yet the promise of a story that could shatter the silence of complacency urged her deeper into the labyrinth. Her first encounter came unexpectedly. In the echoing corridor near the central ward, a soft murmur, indistinguishable from a whisper, reached her ears. She paused, her hand hovering near the recorder. "Is someone there?" she called softly, trying to mask her tremor. From the gloom, a gaunt figure emerged, a former nurse whose tattered uniform hung loosely around her frail body. Her eyes, wide with sorrow and haunted by memories, fixed on Evelyn with a mixture of pity and warning. "They're still here," the nurse rasped, trapped in the corridors of their own pain. Evelyn's voice faltered as she pressed. "Who are you? How do you know so much about this place?" The nurse's thin lips curled into a bitter smile. "I was Marianne," she replied. "I cared for those lost souls, and I watched their agony transform this place into a purgatory of endless torment. You must understand, once you open the door to Ashmore, it opens the door to your own nightmares." Before Evelyn could reply, a sudden clatter echoed from somewhere deeper in the asylum. Marianne's eyes widened with fear. "Run," she implored, her voice barely audible over the distant wail of something not quite human. But Evelyn, her investigative spirit ignited by equal parts dread and curiosity, refused to leave. "I'm here to tell your story," she said firmly. "I want the truth of what happened to these souls." Marianne nodded slowly as if resigned to the inevitable confrontation. Very well. But heed my words, truth here is a poison that infects the heart. Be vigilant, child. Their conversation ended abruptly as they both heard footsteps, slow, measured, and ominously deliberate. Shadows converged at the far end of the corridor, coalescing into the form of a man in a faded suit, his eyes glinting with a malevolent intelligence. His presence exuded an aura of authority and cruelty, as though he had once been the warden of this forsaken place. "You shouldn't be here," the man intoned, his voice both commanding and regretful. "The past is a labyrinth you cannot hope to navigate without losing yourself." Evelyn's courage wavered as she tightened her grip on the recorder. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "I am Dr. Malcolm Ashford," he announced, as if the answer should quell her doubts. "I once believed in progress and cure, but here I learned that the human mind is a fragile prison for both sanity and suffering." His eyes darkened, and for a moment his tone softened with remorse. "We conducted our experiments in the name of salvation, yet we unleashed suffering beyond measure. The patients, my patients, were never truly ours to save. In our quest for control, we condemned them to eternal torment." Marianne trembled behind Evelyn, and the doctor's gaze seemed to pierce her as well as her ear. "You speak of salvation. Yet what does that mean, Dr. Ashford?" she said, her voice a blend of anger and sorrow. "Do you not see that your ambition has become our curse? The evil we harvested here in this name of progress continues to feed on the broken minds left behind." The doctor's eyes flickered with inner conflict. "I did what I believed was right," he murmured. "But the experiments, the therapies we tried, they went awry. Somewhere in between salvation and horror, we opened a door to forces we never understood." His posture sagged as if the weight of his sins was etched into every fiber of his being. "I thought the solution was rationality and science, but all I found was madness." Without further warning, the sound of a distant scream shattered the lingering tension, ricocheting off the decayed walls. Evelyn and Marianne exchanged a glance, the kind that spoke of unspoken terror and shared fate, then hurried down a twisting hallway, the stale air growing colder and more oppressive with each step. The corridor led to a large room once used for group therapy, now a chamber of silent misery with personal belongings scattered about and therapy equipment draped in cobwebs. A large mirror on one wall captured the reflection of Evelyn's anxious face, but something was amiss. Behind her, the ghostly figure of a young man in a tattered hospital gown stood with his eyes brimming with terror and silent pleas for help. Panicked, Evelyn turned around only to find emptiness. No sign of the figure, yet an undeniable cold shiver raced down her spine. "I'm not alone here," she whispered to herself. "The dead linger in these halls." The echo of anguished voices drifted from behind a heavy, reinforced door. Mustering her resolve, Evelyn pushed it open and found herself in a room that had once been the asylum's containment area, now a grotesque mausoleum of unspoken horrors. Metal restraints, rusted and hanging from the walls, cast long, sinister shadows in the weak light seeping through a barred window. The walls themselves bore crude scrawlings, desperate pleas and confessions of agony left by those who had endured unspeakable cruelty. In the center of this oppressive chamber, perched atop a battered metal table, lay a diary bound in worn leather. Its pages were filled with the cramped script of a patient named Daniel, a man whose descent into madness had been meticulously recorded over months of isolation. Evelyn, with trembling fingers, opened the diary. The first entry read, "They promise release from the madness of our minds, but all I see is an endless cycle of torment. I hear the voices of those who died before me, and they cry out in anguish. I fear that our suffering is eternal." A chill deeper than the autumn wind gripped Evelyn as she read account after haunting account of despair, cruelty, and inexplicable phenomena that defied rational explanation. Each sentence was a window into a mind unraveling under the weight of horrors both inflicted and supernatural. The diary mentioned secret rooms, forbidden experiments, and even hints of a demonic presence that had been invited into the asylum's walls during one ill-fated night of occult rituals. As she absorbed each harrowing detail, the door slammed shut behind her. Locked in, Evelyn's heart hammered in her chest. A soft voice began to murmur from the darkness, a voice that seemed to float above the clatter of her racing thoughts. "Please, help me," it whispered, echoing from the far corner of the room. Evelyn's voice, though quivering, managed a reply. "Who are you? What do you want?" The voice grew louder, desperate, yet broken. I am Daniel. I am trapped between life and death. I was a victim, and now I wander these halls, searching for an end to this torment. His spectral form materialized as a translucent figure, his eyes haunted by memories of pain and betrayal. You must tell the world of our suffering so that our souls might finally be freed. Evelyn's resolve hardened. Despite the terror that threatened to overwhelm her, she realized that her role as a chronicler was not merely to report these atrocities, but to liberate these lost souls from the chains of forgotten sins. I will, she promised, her voice steadier now. I will reveal every detail and honor your memories, so no one ever repeats your fate. From somewhere deep in the asylum, the sound of clanging metal and tortured cries intensified, drawing nearer with every agonizing second. Dr. Ashford's voice rang out again, softer and laden with regret this time. You must not meddle further, Evelyn, he cautioned as he appeared once more in the doorway of the containment room. The more you expose, the deeper the abyss becomes. There are forces here that hunger for the despair of the living. Run while you can. Evelyn's eyes blazed with determination as she looked back at the pleading figure of Daniel and then to the remorseful face of the doctor. You once sought salvation here, she retorted, but you opened a gateway to hell. I won't let your mistakes be forgotten in the silence of neglect. I will expose every hidden truth until even the darkness trembles. Dr. Ashford's face contorted with inner conflict, and for a moment it seemed as though he might relent and aid her. But before any alliance could be formed, the asylum itself groaned, its ancient timbers shuddering as if in protest. The floors vibrated beneath their feet as a spectral chorus of voices rose from every corner of the building. Screams, whispers, and lamentations intertwining in an overwhelming symphony of despair. Marianne's soft warning from earlier echoed in Evelyn's mind, urging her to retreat, yet her determination was unyielding. In the chaotic crescendo, whispers reached her ears from unseen lips. Stay. Record us. Do not forget. Every step she took was guided by the spirits of those who had perished within these forsaken walls. She pressed on, her recorder capturing every sorrowful word and every eerie lament that floated in the stagnant air. Navigating through twisting corridors that seemed to shift when unobserved, Evelyn found herself before a grand, locked door adorned with symbols of occult origin. It pulsated with a life of its own, and the pounding of her heart synchronously increased. Gathering every ounce of courage, she retrieved a set of old keys she had discovered in a dusty filing cabinet near the entrance. With trembling hands, she inserted one and turned. The door creaked open, revealing a vast chamber that defied time. Inside was a room lined with portraits of individuals whose eyes appeared to follow her every move, a lineage of suffering and secrets. In the center stood an ornate altar, upon which rested a collection of artifacts, ritualistic daggers, faded manuscripts, and a cryptic journal written in a language that defied ordinary understanding. A heavy silence fell as a presence pervaded the space, a palpable force of ancient evil mixed with the sorrow of countless souls. It was then that a deep, resonant laugh echoed throughout the chamber, sending shivers down Evelyn's spine. From the shadows, a colossal figure emerged, a spectral entity crowned with a twisted diadem, its eyes blazing with unholy fire. In a voice that resonated from the depths of eternity, it declared, "At last a voice arises from the silence. You dare disturb the sanctum of the forgotten?" Evelyn's voice wavered, but remained defiant. "I dare to speak the truth. You have tormented these souls for far too long, and tonight I promise they will be heard." The spectral lord's laugh grew louder, echoing like the toll of a death knell. "Truth," it sneered. "Truth is but a fragment of the lies we were fed, a lie in itself. Your feeble words will only bind you as tightly as the chains that confine us. The more you reveal, the more you will suffer, for the darkness feeds on despair." A sudden flash of images surged through Evelyn's mind. Visions of endless corridors drenched in blood, silent screams etched into walls, and tortured souls writhing in eternal torment. She staggered back, nearly collapsing under the weight of despair. Yet amidst the overwhelming terror, the faces of those who had entrusted their secrets to her steadied her resolve. "Your power comes from our pain, but I will not let fear silence us," she declared, her voice rising over the cacophony of spectral voices. "I am not alone. I carry with me the stories of every soul that has suffered here, every tear shed in vain, and in my words you shall find your reckoning." The spectral lord sneered, a cruel smile twisting its features. "Then you leave us no choice," it proclaimed, and the chamber erupted in a vortex of spectral energy. The artifacts on the altar vibrated as if awakened from a long slumber, and the portraits cried out in silent agony. Shadows merged with light, and for a moment reality itself seemed to fracture. In the ensuing chaos, Dr. Ashford reappeared, his eyes glistening with a final desperate hope. "Evelyn, heed this warning," he shouted. "The curse here is deeper than any man can fathom. Should you chronicle these horrors, know that your soul will forever be tethered to this wretched place. You must decide, write the history of our torment, or let the darkness keep its secrets." But Evelyn had already made her choice. With a resolute heart, she steadied her recorder and began to speak, her words surging forth as a beacon in the consuming darkness. She recounted every chilling detail of the asylum's tragic past, the cruelty of misguided experiments, the anguished cries of lost souls, the ghostly pleas for forgiveness, and the monstrous face of ancient evil that had long held dominion over these halls. Her voice, though trembling at times, grew stronger with each revelation. As her narrative flowed, the spectral lord's power began to wane. The oppressive energy in the chamber receded, replaced by a poignant silence. One by one, the faces in the portraits softened, their eyes no longer burning with relentless suffering, but glowing with a bittersweet relief. The chains that had bound the lost spirits seemed to loosen, each clank echoing their final liberation. For what felt like hours, Evelyn poured her soul into capturing the truth, aware that the price of this act was the slow erosion of her own humanity. In the midst of her narration, tears mingled with a strange, cathartic determination. The voices around her softened into a harmonious chorus of gratitude rather than despair. Even Dr. Ashford, standing in quiet resignation, allowed himself a single look of peaceful regret. "May your words shine a light on the darkest corners of our past," he murmured. The spectral lord, now a withered remnant of its former tyranny, let out one final shuddering laugh before dissipating into nothingness. With its departure, a profound stillness filled the chamber. The altar's artifacts fell silent, and the oppressive weight of despair lifted, replaced by an almost tangible hope that the suffering, long suppressed by a legacy of cruelty, might finally be at an end. When the first pale hints of dawn bathed the asylum in a soft glow, Evelyn emerged from the grand chamber forever changed. Though she carried the scars of every whispered sorrow and every tortured cry, she also carried the salvation of those lost voices, secured within the pages of her journal and the recordings that detailed every grim secret of Ashmore Asylum. In the days that followed, her report spread like wildfire, a testament not only to the horrors of the past, but as a clarion call against repeating its mistakes. Critics marveled at the raw, unvarnished truth captured in her words. Survivors, both living and otherwise, found solace in knowing that their suffering was not in vain, that every anguished cry would be heard and never forgotten. Yet, in the quiet hours of every night, as Evelyn sat by a window watching the creeping dusk, she could still feel the lingering chill of Ashmore's corridors, a reminder that the past, though exorcised from one forsaken place, could never be entirely silenced. For in that labyrinth of horror and remorse, every word she wrote was a promise to remember the innocent, to honor the forgotten, and to always bear witness to the enduring truth that the darkest secrets, when finally told, can light the way to redemption.
Story number 3.
The biting chill of an autumn night crept through the skeletal remains of leafless trees as a bitter mist clung to the ground. In a forgotten corner of New England, hidden among endless stands of ancient pines, lay the Fenwick estate, a sprawling mansion whose dark past whispered through every rotted beam and shattered window. It was said that even the wind spoke its mournful secrets to those brave enough to listen. On this particular night, as an inescapable sense of foreboding pressed upon the landscape, a solitary figure approached the decaying mansion. Isabella Montrose, a once celebrated photographer whose career had been marred by tragedy and scandal, had spent years haunted by mysterious dreams and inexplicable visions. Drawn by a force she could neither ignore nor fully comprehend, she had abandoned the safety of her urban life to seek solace, perhaps even redemption, in the quiet isolation of Fenwick Estate. The mansion, built over a century ago, had long been abandoned after a series of unspeakable events, its story now forgotten except by a handful of superstitious locals. But Isabella believed there was more to the estate than mere myth. There was truth, hidden in the echoes of sorrow and despair. As she pushed open the creaking wrought iron gate, Isabella paused to absorb the atmosphere, a cold, oppressive energy that swallowed sound and light alike. Her heart pounded fiercely, and every nerve in her body screamed caution. With a trembling hand, she reached for her camera, determined to document whatever lay inside, driven by a desperate hope that capturing the estate's secrets might finally free her from her own inner torment. Inside the foyer, dust danced in narrow beams of moonlight that filtered through broken skylights. The floor was littered with brittle, time-worn papers and shattered relics of a life once lavish. As she stepped forward, the sound of her own footsteps echoed in a vast, empty hall, accompanied by a low and distant hum, an eerie lullaby that set her teeth on edge. The silence was punctured only by the creaks of decaying wood, each sound amplifying the oppressive solitude of the place. Her exploration led her deeper into the mansion, past rooms filled with grotesque, abandoned portraits, and hallways lined with tarnished mirrors that seemed to reflect more than her own image. In one such corridor, a faint scent of lavender, an aroma unexpectedly out of place amid decay, wafted through the air. Confused yet compelled, Isabella followed the perfume until it led her to a grand parlor. Here, beneath a shattered chandelier, a solitary figure sat in a velvet armchair. The figure was a woman, her once beautiful features now marred by sorrow and neglect. Dressed in a tattered gown that hinted at former elegance, the woman regarded Isabella with eyes that shimmered like tears, frozen in time. "You've come at last," the ghostly lady whispered, her voice soft as a sigh carried on the wind. "I have waited so long for another soul to share my burden." Isabella's throat tightened. "Who are you?" she managed, her voice barely more than a fragile tremor. The apparition's gaze flickered with ancient grief as she replied, "I am Eleanor Fenwick. I was once the mistress of this estate, and I was trapped here by a curse born of betrayal and bloodshed. Now my existence is no more than an endless vigil, bound to these walls, desperate for someone to remember our story." A chill deeper than the winter's bite surged through Isabella. "What happened here?" she asked, stepping closer, even as the weight of fear threatened to anchor her in place. Eleanor's spectral fingers drummed against the arm of her chair. "My husband Charles was a man consumed by ambition, a man who dabbled with darkness. In his blind pursuit of eternal power, he summoned something that could not be controlled. The entity he beckoned promised immortality in exchange for a piece of our souls, and I was the first to pay the price." Her eyes glowed with a mixture of despair and forbidden knowledge. "We were all ensnared, condemned to a purgatory of regret and terror." Before Isabella could gather her thoughts, the silence shattered with a sudden, resounding clatter from the upper floor, a sound like the frantic pounding of hooves on stone. Eleanor's eyes widened, and she hissed, "It begins again." Isabella's pulse raced. Though terror clawed at her insides, her desire to understand the mansion's mysteries propelled her forward. "Begins what?" "I don't understand," she demanded, her voice wavering between dread and determination. Eleanor leaned forward, her translucent form bending in the flickering half-light. "The curse endures, feeding on each new soul that dares to enter these forsaken halls. Charles's ambition opened a door to something vile, a presence that thrives on fear and despair. Tonight, its hunger grows insatiable." The spectral woman's eyes met Isabella's in a silent plea, as though begging her to turn back. But the camera hung heavily at Isabella's side, its lens an unblinking witness to the haunting narrative. Determined to capture the truth, Isabella ventured upward along a grand staircase that spiraled into darkness. With each step, the air grew colder, and the tormented whispers of long-dead inhabitants gathered around her, their voices blending into a mournful chorus. She paused at a landing where a portrait of Charles Fenwick hung askew on the wall. His eyes, once filled with arrogance and promise, now glared accusingly. As Isabella's fingers brushed the frame, a cold hand seemed to grip her wrist. She jerked away, startled, and heard a voice that was not her own. "Do not disturb the dead." A shudder rippled through her. "Show yourself," Isabella demanded, her voice echoing in the decaying corridor. For a moment, only silence replied. Then a figure emerged from the shadows, a man clad in a dark suit whose face was partly obscured by the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat. His presence exuded both menace and regret. "I am Lawrence," he intoned, his tone somber yet commanding. "I was once a servant of this estate, a guardian of its darkest secrets, but I have become as much a prisoner as its inhabitants. Isabella's curiosity warred with her terror. Guard your secrets? What do you mean? She asked, lowering her camera slightly, her hands shaking as she prepared to record every word. Lawrence's eyes, reflecting centuries of sorrow, met hers. Charles dabbled in ancient forbidden rituals, a pact with forces that should never be trifled with. In his arrogance, he sacrificed our souls to bind that demonic power to this land. I tried to warn him, but his ambition proved too strong. His voice faltered, heavy with regret. And now, each year on this night, the veil between our world and the realm of that darkness thins, allowing it to seek new souls and to torment the ones already ensnared. A low rumble echoed through the corridors as if the building itself were groaning under an unimaginable weight. In the distance, Isabella could discern the sound of frantic footsteps and tortured cries. "Are there others?" she asked in a trembling whisper. Lawrence nodded slowly, his expression grim. "More than you can imagine. They wander these halls, trapped between past and present, lost and longing for release. But release comes only through acknowledgement. The truth must be spoken, even if it condemns you to an eternity of unrest." Isabella's determination hardened. "Then I will speak it," she declared, her voice resonating with both courage and sorrow. "I'll document your stories, your pain, and your struggle. I must do this, not only to free you, but to prove that these tragedies are not forgotten." At that moment, a piercing scream echoed from somewhere deep within the mansion, a harrowing, inhuman wail that reverberated off the walls and froze the blood in her veins. The sound was accompanied by the resounding crash of a door slamming somewhere far off, followed by an unsettling silence that stretched like a prelude to further doom. Lawrence moved closer, his face shadowed by anguish. "That cry," he murmured, "belongs to a soul we lost long ago. Another victim ensnared by the relentless hunger of the darkness." He paused as if listening to voices only he could hear. "It is said that if you follow the wailing, you may find the source, and perhaps the key to ending this nightmare." Without waiting for her reply, he gestured toward a narrow corridor leading to what appeared to be a secondary wing of the mansion. Isabella hesitated, her mind racing with dread and reluctant resolve. Every instinct urged her to flee, to leave this cursed place behind, yet the desperate hope of rescuing the lost souls and freeing them from perpetual torment compelled her to proceed. Clutching her camera like a talisman, Isabella followed Lawrence into the dim corridor. The walls were covered in peeling, faded wallpaper, and every step she took stirred up motes of dust that glistened like tiny specters in the scant light. The corridor seemed to stretch on endlessly, each twist and turn merging into a labyrinth of despair. As she advanced, the haunting cries grew more distinct, a chorus of grief and terror that seeped into the very marrow of her bones. At long last, they arrived at a heavy oak door, its surface marred by age and countless scratches, as if wrought by desperate hands seeking salvation. Lawrence produced an old, tarnished key from the depths of his coat pocket and unlocked the door. It creaked open with a sound that resonated like the lament of the damned. Inside was a small, candlelit chamber. The flickering flames danced across ancient stone walls, illuminating a single figure chained to the wall. It was a man, gaunt and haunted, his eyes wide with a terror that had long since outlived hope. Isabella's heart constricted at the sight. As she stepped forward, the man's labored whisper reached her ears. "Help me, please. Find release." Isabella gently approached, her voice soft and filled with empathy. "I'm here to listen," she promised. "I want to help you. Who are you?" The man's gaze flickered between Isabella and Lawrence. His voice, ragged and trembling, finally spoke his name. "My name is Henry," he rasped. "I was one of those foolish enough to believe in promises of eternal life, those promises that turn to curses under the full moon." His eyes, glistening with tears, shifted to the door behind him. "They come in the night, they hunger, and they will not rest until another soul is claimed." A sudden clamor erupted outside the chamber, the sound of heavy footsteps, angry voices, and a dissonant blend of laughter that sent shivers racing down Isabella's spine. The mansion seemed to tremble, as if the very foundation were quaking under the pressure of unleashed malevolence. Henry's chains rattled, and for a brief moment his eyes flashed with desperate hope. "You must hurry," he urged, "before they break these chains and drag me into their eternal nightmare." Torn between the desire to document every revelation and the need to act to free this tortured man, Isabella hesitated only a heartbeat before nodding. "Tell me what to do," she pleaded. Lawrence, now standing resolutely beside them, replied, "The curse demands acknowledgement. We must recite the true account of what transpired here, a chronicle that honors every wounded soul and exposes the dark bargain forged long ago. Only then can the shackles of despair begin to break." Gathering her courage, Isabella set up her camera in the center of the chamber. With trembling determination, she began to recite aloud the saga of the estate, of Charles Fenwick's reckless ambition, of Eleanor's eternal watch over the sorrowful halls, of the countless lost souls condemned to wander these corridors, and of the unyielding hunger of a darkness that thrived on despair. Her voice echoed, melding with the soft murmurs of Henry's pleas and the solemn guidance of Lawrence. Every word was a defiant act against the suffocating silence of oblivion, a testament to the truth that even in the deepest shadows, the spark of remembrance could kindle the possibility of redemption. As she spoke, the chamber seemed to pulse with a newfound light. The spectral chains that bound Henry shivered, and an almost imperceptible crack appeared in the oppressive aura that had long permeated the room. Outside, the cacophony of tormented shrieks began to fade, replaced by an eerie calm as if the mansion itself was holding its breath. The hours stretched like lifetimes, and as Isabella's recitation reached its final heartfelt words, a profound silence descended. For an interminable moment, nothing stirred but the soft, flickering glow of the candlelight. Then, like a ripple across still water, a quiet, almost imperceptible sigh emanated from the very walls. Henry's chains clattered to the ground, and his gaunt face softened into an expression of weary relief. Eleanor's spirit, seen only as a faint, luminous glimmer in the distance, offered a silent nod of gratitude. Even Lawrence's eyes glistened with unshed tears of bittersweet liberation. But the darkness was not vanquished entirely. Its presence lingered like a malignant shadow on the fringes of reality. Isabella knew that while one fragment of the curse might have been broken, the essence of that unspeakable evil would forever haunt the forgotten corridors of Fenwick Estate. Yet, in that fragile dawn of understanding, there was hope, a promise that as long as someone was willing to remember and to bear witness, the cycle of torment could be challenged. In the days that followed, Isabella remained at the estate, capturing every haunting detail, every lingering echo of a sorrowful past, with both her camera and her unwavering pen. Her work wove together the voices of the damned and the living, a tapestry of truth that transcended mere horror, becoming an elegy for lost souls and a battle cry against the oblivion of forgetfulness. The photographs she took revealed not monstrous apparitions, but expressions of profound agony and the quiet dignity of those who had suffered. Her words resonated with every step she took along the cold, creaking hallways, a constant reminder that even the cruelest curses might be undone by the power of remembrance. Yet every night, as darkness fell over the estate once more, and the wind sighed through broken windows, Isabella felt the ghostly eyes of Fenwick Estate upon her, a silent vigilance that both comforted and warned. And in the lonely hours before sleep claimed her, she would sometimes hear a soft murmur on the edge of hearing, a reminder that the darkness, though weakened, was never truly gone. It lingered, waiting for its next chance to rise, to remind the living that some horrors, no matter how deeply buried, never die. Isabella eventually left Fenwick Estate, her soul forever intertwined with its tragic legacy. She published her story and her photographs, and in doing so, lit a candle in the long-forgotten corners of history. The estate became both a monument to the terrible past and a beacon for those seeking truth in a world all too eager to forget its own ghosts. And though she found success in her revelations, every time she closed her eyes, she could still hear the echo of Eleanor's whispered farewell, Lawrence's solemn vow, and Henry's desperate plea, a never-ending reminder that the darkness of Fenwick Estate was as eternal as the human need to remember.
Story number 4.
A frigid wind cut across the barren moor as dusk bled into night, carrying with it the taste of salt and decay. Far beyond any modern comforts lay Blackmoor Inn, a dilapidated relic built on the very edge of the cliffs, where the turbulent sea pounded mercilessly against jagged rocks below. The inn's crumbling facade and shattered windows whispered the tragedies of a past long buried beneath layers of neglect and spectral sorrow. For decades, townsfolk had exchanged hushed warnings about the place, speaking of inexplicable lights in its upper windows, disembodied voices drifting on the wind, and a mysterious figure seen at the doorway on moonless nights. And tonight, that forbidding silhouette would greet one unsuspecting visitor. Marcus Hanley, an investigative journalist known for his relentless pursuit of the truth, had arrived in the remote village that skirted the moor. His recent articles on historical hauntings had earned him both accolades and jeers, yet nothing had prepared him for the palpable dread that clung to Blackmoor Inn. Drawn by a series of anonymous letters detailing horrific events and unsolved disappearances linked to the inn, Marcus was determined to uncover the secrets that had haunted its halls. With his battered notebook and a digital recorder strapped firmly to his chest, he began his cautious approach along the narrow, overgrown path that led to the ancient structure. The closer Marcus got, the more oppressive the air felt. His breath clouded in the cold, and every step sent echoes through the silence of the moor. The inn's once grand entrance was now a yawning maw, its door half off its hinges and the wood rotted from years of exposure to the wind and rain. As he pushed the door open with trembling hands, a creak resounded like a death knell, an unspoken announcement of his trespass into a realm where time had long since lost its meaning. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of mildew and bitter regret. Faded wallpaper peeled away in long, curling strips from moldy walls. The dim glow of Marcus's flashlight revealed a grand staircase spiraling upward into darkness, and corridors lined with dusty paintings whose subjects bore haunted, sorrowful eyes. Every surface seemed to be imbued with a palpable sense of despair, as if the building itself mourned the lives it had witnessed. As Marcus stepped forward, his heart pounded in sync with his cautious footsteps, each echo a reminder of the fragile barrier between the living and the spectral. Almost immediately, an eerie silence was broken by a soft, almost imperceptible sound, a shuffling step, a whisper, a hushed murmur of a conversation that shouldn't be possible in an abandoned house. Marcus froze in place, every instinct urging him to flee, yet his professional determination overrode his terror. "Hello?" he called out into the darkness, his voice cracking with uncertainty. In reply came only the sound of distant dripping water and the sighing wind. He moved deeper into the corridor, where the oppressive gloom was pierced only by the narrow beam of his light. In one of the long-forgotten sitting rooms, time had almost stopped. A rotted sofa lay askew, its fabric threadbare and stained. On an ancient mantel above a charred fireplace, there was a cracked mirror reflecting a distorted version of the present, one that seemed to ripple with unseen movement. As Marcus stepped closer, his recorder caught a faint, overlapping conversation, one that was layered beneath a static buzz. The hushed voices spoke in an unclear dialect, their words half swallowed by time and distance, yet laden with sorrow and anger. He listened, heart pounding, as the voices repeated a single urgent phrase: "Release us, please." The urgent plea sent a jolt of fear through him. Marcus fumbled with his recorder, rewinding the sound to catch every nuance. Though he couldn't decipher the words, the desperate tone was unmistakable. It was as if a legion of desperate souls were crying out from beyond the veil, begging for liberation from a curse that had chained them to that forsaken place. With his pulse racing, Marcus resolved to continue further, determined to follow the trail of voices regardless of the growing terror that took hold of his mind. Ascending the staircase, he entered what appeared to be the inn's upper floor, a labyrinth of narrow halls and shadowed rooms. His light revealed remnants of what might once have been a lavish establishment. A grand dining room with a long table covered in a decaying lace cloth, portraits of stern-faced individuals whose eyes seemed to track his every move, and a series of locked doors that whispered secrets of their own. On the far side of the corridor, one door stood slightly ajar, a faint blue glow emanating from the gap. With a deep breath, Marcus pushed it open. Inside was a small, forgotten chapel, a space that once served as both a sanctuary and a confessional. The air was colder here, heavier with a palpable sense of foreboding and sorrow. Candles lay melted into grotesque shapes on a cracked altar, and stained glass windows, though shattered in many places, cast eerie mosaics of light and shadow upon the floor. Marcus's eyes caught movement in the corner of the room, and he turned sharply to see a figure standing against a wall. A woman, her dress a tattered remnant of a bygone era. Her face was half hidden in shadow, but the other half revealed eyes brimming with unspoken anguish. Who Who are you? Marcus managed, his voice quivering between curiosity and dread. The woman's gaze locked onto his, and her lips parted in a silent plea. I am Agatha, she whispered, her voice both sorrowful and urgent. I was once a guest at Blackmore Inn. Her confession was cut short by a distant sound, a clattering noise that seemed to come from the heart of the building. Agatha's expression contorted with terror as she backed away toward the wall. They are coming. You must leave, she pleaded, her eyes wide with an unspoken warning. Before Marcus could respond, the silence was shattered by footsteps echoing in the corridor outside the chapel. The steps were measured and purposeful, accompanied by the sound of a heavy chain dragging across stone. Marcus's grip tightened on his flashlight, his breath coming in shallow gasps as he listened to the approaching footsteps. Agatha's eyes darted around in panic, and she murmured, They hunger. They never rest. It is the curse. You have awakened it. The footsteps grew louder, and in a sudden burst of movement, the chapel door slammed shut as if by an unseen hand. Marcus, his heart in his throat, raced to the door and tried to pull it open, but it would not budge. Trapped, he retreated to the far corner of the chapel, his back pressed against the cool stone wall. There, in the dim flicker of dying candlelight, he could see the faint outlines of spectral figures emerging from the shadows, translucent shapes drifting silently along the walls, their eyes empty yet full of torment. One by one, they gathered in a circle around the altar, whispering among themselves in voices layered with anguish and regret. Marcus strained to listen. Who are you? He demanded, though his voice was barely audible. The figures turned as one toward him, and an overwhelming sensation of sorrow washed over him. In unison, they spoke a single mournful phrase, We are bound, forever lost in the silence. As the spectral chorus faded into a dreadful hush, a deep, resonant thud sounded from above, a sound like the beating of giant, unseen wings. Marcus knew, with a deep, primal certainty, that whatever haunted Blackmore Inn was not a remnant of tragic history alone, but something far more malignant, a dark force that fed upon fear and despair. Desperation clawed at him. Marcus fumbled through his notebook for any clue, with any reference to break the curse that ensnared these tormented souls. His hand landed on a brittle scrap of paper he had discovered earlier in the inn, a page hastily scrawled with cryptic symbols and fragments of an incantation. The text, nearly illegible with age and decay, hinted at an ancient ritual meant to release those trapped by the inn's curse. The incantation promised salvation but warned of the price, a sacrifice of one's own spirit to balance the scales. Marcus hesitated. His duty as a journalist drove him to document every horror, but the thought of becoming part of the cursed legend chilled him to the core. Before he could decide, Agatha reappeared at the chapel door, now partly ajar. You must leave, she repeated in a trembling whisper, her eyes wild with fear and sorrow. The curse demands a sacrifice. They take what is offered, and if you stay, you will become one of us, forever imprisoned between the living and the dead. Marcus's heart pounded as the spectral voices swelled around him. The sound of heavy footsteps and clanking chains from the corridor reminded him that time was running short. In that moment, a terrible clarity came over him. His own curiosity and desire for the truth had drawn him into a darkness he could scarcely comprehend, and now escaping would be as treacherous as confronting the horror head-on. Agatha, he said, his voice resolute despite the terror coiling in his gut. I didn't come here to become a ghost. I came for the truth, and I will tell it, no matter the cost. His declaration echoed strangely in the cursed chapel, melding with the soft murmurs of the damned. Show me what I must do. Agatha hesitated, her spectral face etched with sorrow. There is an altar in the deep cellar, she murmured, beneath the inn's foundations. There lies the heart of the curse, a relic of eldritch power left behind by those who performed forbidden rites in a desperate bid for immortality. To break the cycle, you must offer a token of your spirit and recite the incantation. Only then will the darkness recede. With trepidation and grim determination, Marcus agreed. I will do it, he said, though each syllable felt weighted with the burden of an unknown destiny. The silence that followed was profound, as though the inn itself were holding its breath. Guided by Agatha's faint, trembling light, Marcus made his way to the narrow, winding staircase leading down to the cellar. The basement was a labyrinth of narrow passageways and collapsed corridors, lit only by the feeble glow of a dying lantern that Agatha carried. The walls, slick with moisture and stained with rust, seemed to close in on him as he descended deeper into the heart of Blackmore Inn. At last, they reached a cavernous room carved from stone, its architecture a haunting echo of medieval crypts. In the center of the chamber stood a stone altar, covered in strange symbols and slick with damp moss. Marcus's eyes widened as he noticed a crude carving embedded into the altar, a symbol that pulsed with an unholy light, as if it were alive. The air was thick with the acrid scent of sulfur and the unmistakable tang of decay. Marcus's hand trembled as he retrieved the torn scrap of paper from his pocket. The fragile incantation, its letters nearly illegible, was his only hope of releasing the anguished souls trapped within this accursed place. The spectral residents of the inn, now a distant, mournful whisper in his mind, seemed to watch him with an intensity that pierced his soul. He closed his eyes, inhaled sharply, and began to recite the ancient words in a voice that, despite its quaver, resonated with desperate courage. As he uttered the final syllable, the room shuddered violently. The unholy symbol on the altar flared to life, bathing the chamber in an eerie, pulsating glow that illuminated the darkest recesses of the cellar. A deafening roar like the sound of 1,000 anguished spirits, released at once, reverberated through the stone halls. Marcus felt an invisible force press against him, as if the very weight of centuries of misery were trying to swallow him whole. For a moment, time itself seemed to fracture. Shadows danced manically along the walls, and in the tumult, visions of sorrow and despair unfurled before Marcus's mind's eye. He saw the cursed souls, their eyes pleading with him for deliverance, the tortured spirit of a young girl whose laughter had been silenced too soon, a grieving father forever mourning the loss of his child, and a haggard old man whose face was etched with regret. Their cries mingled with the incantation, a symphony of despair that threatened to overwhelm his senses. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the tumult subsided. The pulsating light faded, and the oppressive force lifted from Marcus's body. In the ensuing silence, he felt the ethereal presence of the inn's inhabitants shifting, a bittersweet sigh, as though they were finally unburdening themselves of an age-old torment. The stone altar, its surface now dull and lifeless, bore silent witness to the ancient bargain that had been undone. Marcus staggered back, his heart aching with relief and sorrow. The incantation had worked, and with it, the dark energy that had long plagued Blackmore Inn began to dissipate. As he ascended from the depths of the cellar back into the abandoned corridors, the oppressive atmosphere slowly lifted, replaced by the tentative promise of a new dawn. Yet, even as the first hints of light crept through the broken windows, Marcus knew that the scars of the inn's tragic history would forever be etched in his soul. Outside, standing in the eerie quiet of the moor as dawn broke over the horizon, Marcus paused to catch his breath. The chill of the night still clung to him, and though the spectral voices had receded to a mournful whisper, the memory of their desperate pleas would forever haunt his dreams. Blackmore Inn, its curse finally exorcised, stood silent, a solemn monument to the horrors of a past that had been laid to rest. But Marcus understood that not all darkness can be banished entirely. Some remain like shadowed echoes in a forgotten hall, waiting for the unwary to stir them once more. As he retraced his steps along the lonely path leading away from the cursed estate, Marcus's mind churned with the enormity of what he had witnessed. He clutched his notebook tightly, each page heavy with the weight of truth and sorrow. He vowed that the tale of Blackmore Inn would serve as both a cautionary account and a tribute to the lost souls who had yearned for release. With resolute determination, he began to scribble down his memories, an act of penance and remembrance, a promise that their voices would not fade into oblivion. Even as the sun ascended, dispelling the lingering shadows of the night, Marcus could still hear the faint spectral murmur of gratitude, a quiet echo that affirmed the fragile victory of light over darkness. The inn's walls, now quiet and still, bore silent witness to the exorcism of an ancient curse. Yet deep within its recesses, where the memories of unspeakable torment still lurked, there remained a hushed warning that those who venture too far into the dark corners of history may find themselves forever marked by the ghostly shadows of their own unbridled curiosity. In the weeks that followed, Marcus's account of Blackmore Inn shocked and moved readers far and wide. Critics marveled at the raw, unvarnished truth while local lore was forever altered by the revelation that even the darkest curses can be challenged by one determined soul. But in quiet moments, when dusk returned and shadows lengthened, Marcus would sometimes awaken to the sound of distant footsteps and the soft, mournful plea of a long-forgotten spirit, a reminder that horror, no matter how deeply laid to rest, always waits for another midnight. And so, with a heart heavy yet resolute, Marcus Hanley carried the legacy of Blackmore Inn with him, etched into every word he penned, every breath he took under starlit skies. It was a legacy of sorrow and strength, a testament to the eternal struggle between light and dark, truth and terror. In the whispers of the moorland wind, the inn would forever sing its mournful tale, a spectral elegy for those who dared to seek the darkness within.
Story number 5.
In the remote expanse of the northern highlands where fog clung to rugged peaks and the twilight never fully yielded to daylight, there lay a ruined sanctuary known only as St. Benedict's Abbey. Abandoned for centuries, the crumbling fortress had long been a refuge for whispered legends and unholy superstition. The locals, hardened by generations of austere mountain life, spoke in furtive tones of the abbey's cursed halls, a place where the passage of time seemed arrested in perpetual gloom and where souls of the damned wandered in search of solace that never came. Dr. Nathan Collier, a determined historian with an insatiable curiosity for forgotten relics of the past, had spent years piecing together the tragic history of monastic orders and the arcane rituals they dared to perform. When fragments of letters and journals surfaced in dusty archives hinting at a secret chapter in the Abbey's history, Nathan found himself irresistibly drawn to its spectral silhouette against a bruised sky. With nothing but his notebooks, a weathered camera, and a heart steeled by academic resolve, he embarked on a solitary expedition deep into the heart of the Highlands. The final stretch to the Abbey was marked by a narrow, winding mountain path that snaked through mist-laden heather and skeletal pines. With every step, Nathan's boots stirred memories of ancient battles against elements that had claimed many lives in these harsh climes. He recalled the warnings whispered in the village below. To stray too far from the beaten track was to invite the watchful eyes of forces best left unprovoked. But determination outweighed caution, and soon the ancient stone walls of St. Benedict's loomed ahead, half swallowed by ivy and the relentless advance of time. Pushing open a heavy, iron-bound door, Nathan stepped into a vestibule choked with silence. Dust motes danced in the narrow beams of his flashlight, revealing layers of damp moss and crumbling frescoes whose colors had long since faded into sorrowful monochrome. Each step on the flagstones echoed in an emptiness that felt deliberately void of life, as if the structure itself had resigned to its fate of eternal solitude. As he moved deeper into the sanctum, the temperature dropped noticeably, and the once muted echoes took on the quality of soft voices speaking from a realm unseen. In a vast cloister illuminated by the diffused light of a hidden skylight, he discovered rows of stone benches and altar remnants that bore the scars of violent weather and mysterious decay. At the far end, a massive stained glass window, though largely shattered, still depicted a noble procession of monks whose eyes seemed to follow his every move. In that moment, Nathan felt the chill of unseen presences and wondered if the whisperings of the Abbey's past were more than mere echoes of bygone voices. He settled near a crumbling pillar, intent on deciphering a weathered inscription carved with frantic script into the stone. The words told of forbidden rites and a terrible pact, a desperate bid for salvation that had twisted the souls of those who dared to invoke the unknown. As he transcribed the text into his notebook, a soft rustle reached his ears. Initially, he assumed it to be the restless wind, yet the sound resolved into distinct footsteps advancing slowly from the shadowed archway behind him. "Who's there?" Nathan called, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart against his ribcage. For a long, interminable moment, only silence answered. Then, as his flashlight's beam swept over a figure emerging from the gloom, he saw not a living person, but a spectral form clad in the simple habit of a medieval monk. The ghost's eyes were hollow voids, yet they shimmered with an inner melancholy that spoke of endless regret. "You seek the truth," intoned the apparition in a voice that reverberated like wind through a ruined cloister. "But some truths are better left entombed within these cursed walls." Nathan's scientific mind battled with the primal terror rising in him. I am a historian, he replied in a tone that sought confidence. I wish only to record what happened here, not to conjure darkness or disrespect the dead. The phantom's ethereal face flickered with sorrow before responding, I am Brother Ambrose, once entrusted with our sacred vows. I witnessed the unraveling of our souls when ambition turned to hubris. Our brethren, in their desperation, sought eternal life by bargaining with that which lies beyond the mortal veil. And so we were damned for our transgressions. A gust of cold wind flurried the fallen parchment on the altar, and Nathan's eyes were drawn to the chaotic script that detailed an incantation meant to bind and imprison, an incantation that had been spoken in the Abbey's final hours. Ambrose continued, There came a night when our chance summoned a darkness, a presence that devoured hope and condemned us to wander these walls in eternal sorrow. Since that cursed night, the souls trapped in this place have been restless, forever doomed to repeat the errors of our past. Before Nathan could question further, a low, haunting lament seemed to emanate from the very stone walls. The sound was like a dirge for lost innocence, a mass of voices lamenting in a language older than time itself. In the dim corridor leading to the sacred refectory, ethereal silhouettes gathered silently at a long table, their translucent faces blank yet burdened with unspoken torment. They moved with a slow, mournful grace, their words lost to the abyss between life and death. Driven by a need to understand, Nathan followed the apparitions into the recesses of the abbey. In one crumbling chamber, he discovered a small cell where a battered ledger lay open on a stone slab. The ledger was filled with frantic entries, desperate pleas to break the curse, and detailed accounts of forbidden experiments undertaken by an abbot whose descent into obsession had scarred both his body and soul. One entry, scrawled in a trembling hand, read, The price of immortality is unending torment. In our quest to defy the natural order, we invited the wrath of the void. Should the light of truth ever dispel this curse, we might be redeemed, but such revelations come at a cost beyond measure. Nathan's skin crawled as the implications of the written horrors sank in. It was as if the ledger itself bled despair, a repository of every sin and sacrifice committed within these accursed stones. He felt an overwhelming compulsion to record every detail, certain that the voices of the damned must be heard so that history would not forget their plight. At that moment, the creaking of heavy stone steps echoed from above, a sound that demanded attention and announced the arrival of a new specter. Rushing to the upper vestibule, he found himself face to face with another shade, a figure draped in a tattered black robe, its form more solid than the others, and its eyes burning with an unearthly intensity. The figure radiated authority and deep sorrow, and when it spoke, the tone was both gentle and menacing. Dr. Collier, the apparition intoned with eerie certainty, your inquisitiveness has brought you to a crossroads. I am Abbot Sylvanus, once leader of this order. In our arrogance, we attempted to master death, and in doing so, doomed ourselves. Now, you stand where the veil thins. Know that every word you write and every truth you reveal binds you closer to our faith. Nathan's pulse thundered in his ears. I meant no disrespect, he stammered. I seek only to understand and to ensure that your story is not lost to oblivion. Abbot Sylvanus's spectral eyes softened, yet his voice resonated with finality. Some stories once told change the fabric of our reality. To record these lamentations is to invite the curse that we bear. But if ignorance condemns you to eternal sleep in darkness, perhaps knowledge is your only refuge. The abbot's head bowed, as if in sorrow, before rising again. If you are to leave this place a messenger of our pain, you must honor the ritual of remembrance. Only then will our voices be set free, and only then can you hope to escape the endless cycles of torment. Torn between the urge to flee and the lure of uncovering the full extent of this spectral tragedy, Nathan resolved to accept the abbot's challenge. He gathered the fragmented incantations from the ledger and, with the help of Brother Ambrose, carefully pieced together the ritual meant to sever the unholy pact that had doomed the monks. That night, as moonlight spilled through fractured windows and bathed the deserted refectory in ghostly luminescence, Nathan prepared for the ceremony. He arranged the remnants of ancient relics, rusted chalices, fractured rosary beads, and faded manuscripts upon the altar that had once hosted divine services. Surrounding him, the spectral congregation of monks gathered in silent vigil. Their faces, warped by centuries of regret and sorrow, seemed to shimmer with hope as if this long-awaited moment might bring release from their penance. Nathan began to recite the incantation in a voice that trembled but grew in resolve as the ancient words took form. In the name of the forsaken, we call upon the light of truth to break these chains. Let the sorrow of our sins be washed away by the grace of remembrance. By the power of our collective grief, may we be freed from the shadow that binds us. As his words echoed through the vaulted chamber, the temperature plummeted, and a palpable force coalesced in the space between the living and the dead. The assembled ghosts shuddered, their forms wavering like candle flames in a storm. Outside, the wind howled along the ancient stone walls as if in mourning, and a profound silence descended upon the abbey, a silence that was at once oppressive and expectant. For several agonizing minutes, nothing stirred except for the echo of Nathan's incantation. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, the air began to shimmer with faint luminescence. The spectral monks, whose faces had been etched with eons of despair, slowly lifted their gaze toward the altar. In that moment, Abbot Silvanus stepped forward, his countenance now free of the stoic severity of his former guise, replaced by an expression of quiet relief. "You have done what we hoped no mortal would dare to attempt," the abbot intoned, his voice resonating with an otherworldly timbre. "The curse that has bound our souls is weakened, and for a fleeting moment, the light of truth has pierced the shadow." His eyes, though still glowing with spectral light, held a glimmer of the compassion that had once led him to guide his brethren. Nathan's heart pounded as he observed the transformation around him. Slowly, the oppressive energy that had pervaded the abbey began to ebb, replaced by an ethereal calm that belied the tumultuous rituals performed moments before. Even the heavy burden of centuries seemed to lift from the very stones. Yet in the deep recesses of the abbey, one could still hear the faint, tortured echoes, a reminder that some wounds, once inflicted, may never heal completely. The assembled specters began to fade, their forms dissolving into motes of light that danced upward toward the fractured stained glass window. Brother Ambrose, his expression lingering in a blend of relief and resignation, whispered, "May our souls find the rest that we were denied in life." And Abbot Silvanus, with eyes that gazed as if beyond the mortal coil, added softly, "Remember us, so that our sorrow might one day be redeemed." In the wake of the ritual's conclusion, Nathan remained alone in the vast, silent hall. The weight of what he had witnessed, a communion between the living and the damned, a battle fought with words and rituals, settled deep within him. He knew that his research, his recording of these lost voices, was now irrevocably intertwined with the fate of St. Benedict's. Not only had he become a keeper of their tragic history, but he now bore the invisible mark of the curse, a burden of remembrance that would follow him to his final days. As dawn's first timid light seeped through the broken arches, Nathan stepped out into the cold morning air. The abbey, though still desolate and crumbling, no longer exuded the same palpable malevolence that had greeted him on his arrival. Instead, there lingered a fragile serenity, as if the walls themselves were finally able to exhale after centuries of suppressed grief. Yet even as he began his journey back down the mountain path, Nathan could not shake the lingering sensation that the abbey's story was far from over. In quiet moments, when the night crept over his dreams, he would hear the faint murmur of distant chanting or catch the reflective gaze of a sorrowful monk in a fogged window. The memory of St. Benedict's Abbey, its darkened halls and tragic souls, would forever be etched in his mind, a ghostly reminder of the price of forbidden ambition and the everlasting quest for redemption. Driven by the solemn duty to ensure that no truth was allowed to vanish into the abyss of oblivion, Nathan returned to civilization. Over the following months, he meticulously compiled every detail of his experiences, every note spoken by the spectral voices, into a comprehensive record of the Abbey's cataclysmic history. His work, delivered through scholarly texts and cautious public discourse, stirred the hearts of those who believed that history must remember even its most painful chapters. Even as accolades threatened to uplift him, Nathan found that the darkness of St. Benedict's remained embedded within his soul. In the quiet, solitary hours before sleep, amidst the clatter of rain on glass and the distant call of nocturnal creatures, he would sometimes hear a faint, rhythmic chanting, a lullaby for the lost, that tugged at the recesses of his memory. and he knew that the souls of those condemned to wander the abbey's halls were now, in some small measure, freed by the truth he had set forth. For Nathan Collier, the journey into the shadowed cloister of St. Benedict's Abbey was not merely an academic pursuit, but a pilgrimage into the very heart of despair and the promise of redemption. It was a testament to the enduring power of remembrance, that even in the midst of unspeakable horror, a single voice might pave the way to salvation for those whose stories were nearly forgotten. And so, whenever dusk settled once again over the highlands, and the mists rose from the craggy slopes like silent, watchful sentinels, the legacy of the ruined abbey whispered softly on the wind, a lingering, mournful elegy for the fallen, and a solemn vow that the truth would remain, forever echoing against the ravages of time.
Story number 6.
A bitter autumn wind howled over the barren moor as dusk bled into an inky night, carrying a chill that spoke of long-forgotten sorrows. Far from the familiar hum of city life, Crescent Lake lay shrouded in mist and ancient legends, its dark waters reflecting not the stars above but the weight of cursed memories. On the far bank of the lake, hidden by tangled willows and gnarled oaks, stood a neglected mansion known only as the Mourning House. Its crumbling facade, the peeling paint of what once was regal, and its broken windows that stared like haunted eyes, hinted at a tragedy that had seeped into every stone. Alexander Moore, an investigative journalist with a knack for unearthing forgotten histories, had received a letter several weeks prior, handwritten in spidery script and unsigned, hinting that the secrets of the Mourning House were darker than any urban myth. With a haunted past of his own, and the need to confront memories that he had long buried, Alexander found himself drawn irresistibly to the lake's edge. He hoped that by revealing its secrets he could exorcise the demons that had plagued him since childhood. The journey to Crescent Lake was a solitary one. The road narrowed to a single, winding track bordered by skeletal trees stripped bare by the relentless winter. As Alexander's car sputtered to a stop near the entrance to a long-forgotten graveyard, fog began to crawl along the ground, wrapping the world in a veil of eerie silence. Clutching his leather-bound journal and a digital recorder, he stepped out under the oppressive weight of twilight, each step echoing in the encroaching gloom. Before him loomed the Mourning House, its silhouette stark against a sky broken only by the pallid glow of a reluctant moon. The door, scarred by time and neglect, hung half off its hinges, creaking on rusty pins as the wind teased it. Alexander hesitated, recalling cryptic warnings from his childhood neighbors, stories of a family lost to despair, of nights filled with unearthly weeping and whispers that could drive men to madness. His pulse quickened, yet his determination was unyielding. Inside, the mansion's interior was a mausoleum of memories. An overwhelming smell of damp decay merged with an undercurrent of something else, a coppery tang that hinted at old blood. Faded wallpaper, torn and curling at the edges, bore images of happier times now blurred by sorrow and neglect. The silence was broken only by the sound of his own footsteps and the distant drip of water echoing through vast, empty halls. Alexander moved cautiously, his flashlight sweeping over the remnants of opulence. In a grand foyer with a shattered chandelier above, he discovered a portrait of a dignified woman with eyes so sorrowful they seemed to weep. A tattered plaque beneath read simply, "Evelyn." His mind flickered back to whispered tales of Evelyn Blackwood, the lady of the house, said to have suffered a loss so unbearable that her soul was doomed to wander these corridors for eternity. Was it possible that her spirit still lingered here, bound by grief? A sudden creak pulled Alexander from his thoughts. From behind a heavy embroidered curtain in what had once been the parlor, a figure emerged. A woman, draped in a gown that, though faded, still exuded a forlorn elegance. Her eyes were a murky gray, filled with a profound sadness that chilled him to the core. Who are you?" Alexander managed, voice catching in his throat. The apparition's voice was soft and trembling, as if each word were a plea for release. "I am Evelyn," she whispered, her gaze fixed on a distant point in the room. "I have waited for so long, for someone to remember." Alexander's recorder clicked on, capturing the spectral voice as he stuttered. "What happened to you?" Evelyn's expression contorted with sorrow. "The darkness came, in the night of the falling leaves. My beloved Jonathan was taken by the curse that haunts this place. I have been left in eternal mourning, chained to memories and regret. The house, It holds a secret that should never be uncovered. Before Alexander could press further, a sound of heavy, measured footsteps echoed from the corridor behind him. Evelyn recoiled, her form wavering like a candle in the wind. "They are near," she hissed. "Hide, please. Do not wake what sleeps below." The heavy footsteps grew louder, and from the gloom emerged a tall, gaunt man in a threadbare suit. His eyes burned with an otherworldly intensity that seemed to strip the color from the very air. "Evelyn, you know the price of breaking the silence," he intoned, his voice deep and resonant, a sound that reverberated with centuries of regret. Alexander's heart hammered in his chest. "Who are you?" he demanded, though a tremor in his voice betrayed his growing terror. The man fixed Alexander with a gaze so piercing it felt as though every buried secret of his past was laid bare. "I am Silas," he said slowly, "and I am the keeper of these souls. This house is our tomb. Those who trespass on our sorrows may never leave unscathed." Evelyn's form flickered, and her whisper came out nearly inaudible. "Run, before you join us in eternal lament." But Alexander, caught between investigative duty and raw, paralyzing fear, felt compelled to follow every haunting lead. I need to know," he said, stepping forward despite the oppressive dread coiled in his gut. "What is this curse? What secret holds you here?" Silas's face hardened with remorse. Years ago, the Blackwood family made a desperate bargain. When Jonathan was struck down by a mysterious illness that no doctor could cure, Evelyn sought salvation in forbidden rites. In her grief, she performed a ritual meant to spare him from death's embrace. But no light is born of darkness unchallenged. The ritual beckoned a presence from beyond, a force that demanded a sacrifice of love, a price paid in eternal suffering. As Silas spoke, echoes of distant sobs filled the room, a chorus of anguished voices that seemed to rise from the very walls. The portrait of Evelyn wavered in the dim light, and the glass in the broken windows shimmered with cold, spectral luminescence. Alexander's mind raced. The letter that had drawn him here mentioned true horrors to fall asleep to, stories whispered in the dead of night that blurred the line between nightmare and memory. Now he found himself living one of those horror tales. "Is there a way to break the curse?" he asked urgently. "To let you go?" A heavy silence followed as Silas and Evelyn exchanged a look laden with sorrow. "Some wounds are too deep," Silas murmured, his voice almost regretful. "There is a ritual, a desperate and dangerous incantation hidden in the diary of the first Blackwood. It is said that only by reliving the tragedy, by fully recounting the anguish of the past, can the curse be appeased. But mark my words, seeker of truth, when you begin, you cannot turn back. Your own soul may be weighed and found wanting." Alexander hesitated, torn between self-preservation and the overwhelming compulsion to resolve the mystery that had haunted him for so long. His journalistic spirit insisted that these truths must be unveiled, no matter the personal cost. "I will do it," he said softly, his resolve mingling with a tremor of fear. "I'll write your story. I promise I'll bear witness to your sorrow so that the darkness may finally have its due reckoning." Evelyn's form shuddered as if tears of spectral light welled in her eyes. "Then come to the library," she whispered. "There, behind the locked panel, lies the diary of the first Blackwood. Only then may you learn the incantation to set our souls adrift." Following her ethereal gesture, Alexander found himself drawn to a narrow corridor, its passage lined with ancient shelves that still cradled brittle volumes of forgotten lore. The library was a sanctum of dusty silence, a repository of secrets whose pages whispered of love and loss, triumph and terror. In one secluded alcove, behind a heavy oak panel bound by iron straps, he discovered a weathered leather diary. Its pages were yellowed with age, ink bleeding into memories long suppressed. As he opened it, the words leaped from the page in frantic scrawl, telling the tale of a desperate ritual born from grief and regret. The diary recounted how, on a storm-lashed night decades ago, Evelyn had chanted incantations in hopes of pulling Jonathan back from death's clutches, only to invite something far more sinister. The ritual, incomplete and tainted by sorrow, had bound not only Jonathan's fleeting spirit, but all who resided within the mourning house to a cycle of unending lament. The dark presence promised that for every life touched by its sorrow, another would be claimed. Its hunger was eternal. As Alexander's fingers traced the macabre verses of the incantation, a violent gust of wind rattled the library's grimy windows. The temperature plummeted as if the cold hand of death itself had passed through the room. Outside, the sound of water lapping against the lake's shore grew ominously louder. The words of the incantation promised a release, a transient reprieve from the ceaseless grief, but at a steep price. He would need to recite it aloud, binding his own essence to their tale, so that their story might be set free from the chains of sorrow. Unsure whether his decision was driven by duty or doomed curiosity, Alexander stepped back into the main hall, the diary clutched tightly in his grasp. Silas was waiting for him in a dimly lit corner, his expression now that of mournful acceptance. "It is time," he said quietly. "Find the chamber below, where the Blackwood family once gathered on nights of desperation. There, in the heart of the morning house, you must recite the incantation." Leading him through crumbling corridors and down a narrow, winding staircase concealed beneath layers of rotting floorboards, Silas guided Alexander to a subterranean chamber. The air was thick with the must of damp earth and ancient sorrow. Flickering candles provided scant illumination, their feeble light dancing across walls inscribed with cryptic symbols and the faded echoes of prayer. In the center of the chamber, upon an ornate stone pedestal, lay a blackened altar. It was here, Silas intoned, that generations of Blackwoods had both celebrated and mourned, and where the final ritual should be performed. Alexander set the diary on the pedestal, his hands trembling as he opened it to the page bearing the incantation. The assembled specters, the lingering souls of Evelyn, Jonathan, and countless others, gathered in a silent circle around him. Their eyes, hollow and burdened, fixed upon him with a pleading intensity. "Speak the words," Silas urged in a low, grave tone that mingled with the distant toll of a bell. Alexander's voice wavered, but then began to rise in a solemn cadence, echoing off the stone walls. "In the name of love lost and sorrow unbound, we call upon the silent earth, shatter the chains that bind our souls, and let the grief give way to rebirth." With each syllable, the atmosphere trembled, shadows stirred, and the very air seemed to pulsate with the raw energy of despair and hope intertwined. The candles flickered violently, as if challenged by an unseen force, and a gust of spectral wind swept through the chamber, snuffing out light and leaving only the incandescent glow of the gathered spirits. For several long, torturous minutes, Alexander recited the incantation over and over, as if trying to imprint it upon the fabric of time. The voices of the lost rose in a crescendo, a chorus of lamentation that reverberated deep within his soul. In that moment, Alexander felt something shift inside him, a merging of his own grief with the collective sorrow that had haunted this place for so long. The darkness, which had so long lurked in every crumbling corner of the house, receded in a surge of luminous catharsis. Then, as abruptly as it had begun, the overwhelming sensation of despair was replaced by a fragile calm. The specters, their forms once blurred by constant agony, began to fade into the gentle luminescence of the chamber's sparse light. Evelyn's sorrowful eyes softened as she murmured, "At last our story may find peace, thanks to you." Silas stepped closer, his voice laden with both gratitude and a lingering melancholy. "You have given us rest, though you now bear our memory within you. The curse is broken, yet know this. Once the truth of our pain is shared with the world, you will carry our echoes wherever you wander. Your nights may be filled with dreams not entirely your own." Alexander's heart ached with both relief and foreboding. "I accept this burden," he said in a resolute tone, "for history must remember, and for our souls to be free, the truth must live on." As the last of the spectral voices dwindled into silence, the chill in the chamber lessened, replaced by a sense of mournful release. The incantation's final echo faded into the walls, and the blackened altar stood as a solemn witness to a ritual completed, a covenant forged by despair and redeemed by remembrance. In the quiet that followed, Alexander retraced his steps back through the labyrinthine corridors of the mourning house. The oppressive atmosphere had shifted subtly. Though the mansion's scars of tragedy remained, its malevolent energy was tempered by an air of wistful finality. Outside, the murky waters of Crescent Lake reflected the soft light of a nascent dawn. The fog began to lift, unveiling the melancholy beauty of a world cleansed by sorrow and the promise of new beginnings. Alexander emerged from the gates with the diary under his arm, haunted not solely by the ghosts of the past, but also by the weight of his own destiny. Over the following weeks, he transformed his experience into a meticulous account, a chronicle of terror, loss, and the desperate hope that remembrance might mend what was once shattered. His writings, though heavy with the burden of grief, resonated with readers far and wide, serving as a poignant reminder that some truths, however harrowing, are worth the cost. Yet, even as accolades and recognition poured in, Alexander could not escape the subtle remnants of that night. In the quiet hours before dawn, and in the reflective silence of a lone midnight drive, he sometimes sensed a soft, lingering whisper, a voice, gentle and sorrowful, reminding him of the countless souls who had finally found release. Each time he closed his eyes and whispered back his pledge, that their story, their truth, would never be forgotten. In the end, the mourning house on Crescent Lake stood as both a monument to unfathomable despair and a beacon for those who dared to find beauty in truth. And though Alexander's own nights remained tinged with sorrow, they were tempered by the knowledge that his courage had granted a measure of peace to the lost, their voices now freed to echo across the realms of memory.
Story number 7.
A dense fog rolled in over the abandoned township of Morrison Hollow as twilight surrendered to the long, oppressive night. The quiet that blanketed the streets was more than a lull. It was a warning. In the heart of the forsaken village stood a mansion, its crumbling facade and sagging porch, a testament to a bygone era of affluence and hidden sins. Locals whispered of unspeakable horrors lurking in its empty halls, but no one dared to approach after dark. Tonight, however, fate would force one soul to confront the unimaginable. Evelyn Ward, a solitary researcher with an unyielding curiosity about the paranormal, had heard the stories since childhood. The mansion, long labeled Ravenwood House, was reputed to be cursed after a mysterious disappearance decades ago. A series of cryptic letters, discovered in an old diary hidden in her late grandmother's belongings, had spurred Evelyn to return to the village of her youth, a place she had long avoided, to unlock the mansion's secrets. Despite the mounting dread in her heart, the need for answers eclipsed her apprehension. Clutching a flickering lantern and a leather-bound journal, she stepped through the heavy iron gate that groaned as if warning her to stay away. Inside, the mansion was a mausoleum of memory and decay. Dust coated every surface and cobwebs clung like tattered curtains in corners. Faded wallpaper peeled from the walls in mournful strips, and the wood of the floorboards seemed to creak with every step she took. The air was chilled and heavy, saturated with the scent of rotting wood and something indescribably metallic that hinted of lingering bloodshed. Evelyn's footsteps echoed through the vast entry hall as she carefully examined the portraits that lined the walls. The subjects were somber figures in antiquated attire, their eyes staring emptily as if burdened by secrets. One portrait in particular caught her attention, a young woman with tear-stained cheeks and eyes brimming with despair. The plaque read, Isabella Ravenwood. A cold shiver ran down Evelyn's spine as the whispers of the past seemed to murmur her name. Yet she pressed on, determined to learn the truth. In the parlor, a grand piano sat silent under a heavy layer of dust. The keys were yellowed and chipped, and as Evelyn moved closer, a delicate, almost imperceptible melody seemed to float in the stale air as if played by unseen hands. It must be the wind, she muttered to herself, though deep in her heart she knew that the sound carried an otherworldly sorrow. The silence was abruptly shattered by a soft, almost inaudible sound, footsteps that did not belong to a living soul. Evelyn paused, heart hammering, as she saw a flicker of movement in the peripheral darkness. "Hello?" she called out, her voice small in the vast expanse of the haunted room. For a long, breathless moment, nothing answered. Then, from behind a shattered mirror hanging crookedly on the wall, a figure emerged. It was a young girl, her face pale and eyes wide with a haunting emptiness. She appeared to be clothed in the antiquated fashion of a bygone era, her expression a mingling of fear and pleading sorrow. Are you lost?" the girl whispered, her voice a soft echo that trembled with a forgotten past. Evelyn's throat constricted. "Who are you?" she managed, her hand instinctively clutching her lantern closer. The girl's eyes glimmered with an eerie light as she replied, "My name is Lillian. I was here when everything went dark, when the curse took hold of Ravenwood House." She hesitated, as though weighing whether to reveal more. "They say the house hungers for the living. Every soul that lingers draws it deeper into misery." Evelyn's rational mind battled with the growing dread in her heart. "What do you mean by hungers?" she pressed, her voice barely more than a whisper. Before the child could answer, the sound of heavy, measured footsteps echoed from the far end of the corridor. Lillian's eyes widened in terror, and she clutched at a ragged doll that lay abandoned on a dusty armchair. "They come," she hissed. "The ones who never left. They want to keep us here in endless sorrow." Taking a deep breath, Evelyn guided Lillian toward a side door, hoping to find a safe space to speak. The door led to a narrow passage lit only by the wavering glow of her lantern. As they crept along the corridor, the temperature plummeted, and a pervasive darkness seemed to suffuse every corner. The walls were etched with strange symbols that Evelyn had never seen before, almost as if someone had attempted to hold something back. In a small, neglected study, they found a massive desk strewn with yellowed pages and brittle photographs. Evelyn began rifling through the documents, desperate to piece together what tragedy had befallen the household. One document, written in hurried, looping script, told the story of a forbidden experiment, an attempt by the Ravenwood patriarch to contact forces beyond the mortal plane in a bid to save his ailing daughter. The ritual, however, had gone horribly awry. Rather than restoring life, it had opened a gateway to a realm of ceaseless despair, binding the souls of the household to the mansion and leaving them trapped in a cycle of torment. "This is it," Evelyn murmured, her voice trembling as she recited the lines she had just read. "A pact made with something not meant for this world. The Ravenwoods sacrificed their chance at salvation, and in return the house claimed them, claimed all who entered its domain." As she spoke, a thunderous clamor erupted from above, a sound like the slamming of countless doors and the anguished cries of spirits. The building itself seemed to convulse with malignant life. Lillian whimpered, and Evelyn felt an overwhelming urge to flee, yet her determination to expose the truth rooted her to the spot. Without warning, a deep, resonant voice cut through the chaos. "You dare disturb our eternal mourning?" It boomed, echoing through the study with supernatural authority. The door slammed shut behind them. Shadows elongated and twisted into grotesque shapes on the floor, and a tall figure slowly emerged from the darkness. A man garbed in antiquated finery, his eyes a piercing, angry red. He carried an aura of despair and menace that chilled the very marrow of Evelyn's bones. "I am Augustus Ravenwood, the last of my lineage, and the warden of this cursed estate," he declared, his voice dripping with both fury and sorrow. "For generations, my family sought to cheat the Reaper, and in doing so, we sealed our doom. The ritual we once performed demanded a sacrifice of the living to sustain the lost souls of the dead, and now every visitor is invited to share in our penance." Evelyn's heart pounded wildly. "What do you want from us?" she demanded, her voice trembling between indignation and genuine terror. Augustus's eyes narrowed as he stepped closer, the floorboards creaking ominously under his measured tread. "You have come seeking truth, but truth comes at a price," he intoned. "By probing the past, you awaken the curse anew. Every word you speak, every secret you uncover, binds you ever tighter to Ravenwood House. Are you prepared to pay that price?" The lantern flickered violently, casting jittery shadows around the room as if the very air were alive. Lillian clutched her doll and whimpered softly, her small frame trembling in the presence of this spectral overseer. Evelyn felt a surge of conflicting emotions. There was the fervor of discovery, the need to unravel the mystery of her own dark heritage, and yet an instinctual dread that whispered she should run before it was too late. I'm here to understand," Evelyn stammered, her voice cracking. "I need to know what happened, so that those souls might finally find peace." A heavy silence settled over the study. Augustus's expression softened momentarily, as if touched by a long-forgotten kindness, but that glimpse of humanity was quickly overtaken by an icy resolve. "Very well," he said, his tone measured and devoid of the earlier hostility. "But know this, once you have heard our story, you may never return to the life you once knew. The curse of Ravenwood House is unyielding, and its memory will mark you in ways both seen and unseen." Reluctantly, Evelyn nodded. "Tell me everything," she said, summoning every shred of courage. Thus began a harrowing recounting of the tragic events that had led to the mansion's unholy fate. Augustus explained how, in a desperate bid to rescue his dying sister, his ancestors had sought out forbidden knowledge. In a hidden chamber beneath the house, they had performed a ritual to harness a power that resided in the void between life and death. The incantation intended to restore her to health instead unleashed a malignant force that fed on the family's despair. As each life was sacrificed, intentionally or as collateral, the house absorbed their suffering, forever binding their souls within its walls. The spectral inhabitants were doomed to relive their torment, a ceaseless cycle of grief and anger that could only be interrupted by a willing sacrifice. I have seen many seekers come and go, Augustus intoned sadly. Some have tried to break the cycle by recounting our tale, believing that if our story is told, our anguish will finally be released. But few understand the cost. Our curse demands that the truth be borne by the teller. Every secret, every sorrow will gnaw at your soul until it is indistinguishable from our own. Evelyn's mind reeled with the weight of his words. The idea that her own essence might become entwined with the haunted legacy of Ravenwood House filled her with both terror and a strange sense of purpose. Then if I record this truth, if I spread your story, will it break the curse? She asked, her voice barely audible above the distant sound of creaking floorboards and mournful wind. Augusta's eyes glimmered with a mix of pity and resignation. Perhaps in time, he murmured. But for now, the cycle continues. The curse feeds on the despair of those who remain, and each new soul that intrudes only deepens our eternal lament. At that moment, the very foundations of the mansion trembled, a deep, quaking rumble that resonated through the walls and into the hearts of everyone present. The air turned frigid, and shadows danced with a malevolent energy that sought to claim every light. Lillian's frightened cry pierced the oppressive silence as she tried to hide behind Evelyn, her small form shaking uncontrollably. In the midst of the rising terror, Evelyn realized that she was at a crossroads. Her journalistic pursuit for truth had led her into the epicenter of a living nightmare, and now she faced a choice: to flee and risk leaving these lost souls to their eternal torment, or to embrace their sorrow and become the vessel through which their story would be immortalized. Summoning every ounce of determination, she steadied her voice. "I will record your story," she declared, gripping her journal tightly as if it were a shield against the encroaching darkness. "I will honor your memories and make sure that your anguish is not forgotten, even if I must carry it with me forever." For a moment, the oppressive despair seemed to waver in response to her resolve. Augustus regarded her with solemn eyes, as though acknowledging the bravery and, perhaps, the folly of her decision. "Then write our truth," he said slowly, "and let our sorrow be known. But be warned. The nightmare of Ravenwood House will follow you long after you leave these cursed walls." As if on cue, the distant sound of a mournful violin, a sound not heard since the days of the mansion's happier past, drifted down the corridor, melding with the ghastly whispers of the lost. Evelyn took a deep breath and began to write, her pen scratching feverishly across the pages of her journal as she recounted every detail Augustus revealed. Each word seemed to pulse with a life of its own, imprinting itself upon her mind and soul as the legacy of Ravenwood House seeped slowly into her being. In that cavernous study, time became fluid and the boundary between the living and the dead blurred. As Evelyn chronicled the tragic ritual, she felt an indescribable weight press upon her, a sensation of being both consumed and uplifted by the collective grief of the mansion's past. The spectral figures in the portraits seemed to weep tears of sorrow and relief, and the very walls sighed with a bittersweet release. Hours passed, or perhaps mere moments, before silence finally settled once more. The restless stirring of malevolent energy began to subside, replaced by a fragile calm that offered the slightest hope of redemption. Lillian, her eyes no longer wild with panic but still brimming with melancholy, whispered, "Thank you for remembering us." Her voice, soft as a fading dream, echoed like a prayer in the stillness. Augustus stepped back into the periphery, his expression unreadable. "You have done what few have dared to attempt," he acknowledged, his tone a mixture of admiration and sorrow. "Now the curse is shared. Every soul that has been lost, every moment of despair, has been scribed into your being. It is a burden heavy enough to shatter most hearts, yet also a beacon that may one day guide us to peace." Evelyn looked up from her journal and met his gaze, her eyes glistening with tears that mirrored the tragic beauty of the mansion around her. "I do not know if I can ever be free from this weight," she confessed softly, "but perhaps by telling your story I can honor your memory, and in time help break this cycle." With that, The lantern's glow steadied, and a gentle warmth seemed to replace the lingering chill. The oppressive darkness that had once saturated Ravenwood House appeared to recede, if only slightly, as if hopeful that the truth, now set free by Evelyn's words, might bring solace to the tortured souls. When at last Evelyn stepped out of the mansion and into the cold, unyielding night, she carried with her not only the legacy of Ravenwood House, but also the quiet promise that truth, however painful, had the power to heal. The iron gate creaked shut behind her, and as she walked slowly back along the overgrown path toward the forsaken village, the distant strains of that sorrowful violin faded into the whispering winds. In the weeks and months that followed, Evelyn's account of Ravenwood House spread like a cold, haunting wind through literary circles and into the hearts of those who sought to understand the mysteries of the human soul. Her words resonated with the lost and the desperate, offering a connection to a past too heavy to forget. And though the weight of the mansion's sorrow never fully lifted from her spirit, she learned to see it as both a curse and a blessing. A reminder that even in the darkest places, the truth could be a fragile light capable of dispelling the deepest shadows. On quiet nights, when the world around her slumbered in uneasy silence, Evelyn would sometimes close her eyes and hear the soft, lingering echoes of Ravenwood House, the tender voice of Lillian, the solemn gaze of Augustus, and the collective, melancholic sigh of a legacy long burdened by grief. With each whispered memory, she vowed to keep their story alive, so that the sorrow of those long past would never be forgotten, and so that perhaps one day the curse might be broken for all time.
Story number 8.
A dense, shifting fog rolled over the deserted county road as twilight surrendered to a moonless night. In the distance, the haunting strains of an old calliope floated on the wind, a discordant melody that seemed to beckon lost souls toward an uncertain fate. Miles Turner, a skeptical investigative journalist with a hardened heart from years chasing urban legends, had driven for hours across barren farmlands to reach the outskirts of Granger Falls. Rumor had it that every few decades, a cursed carnival known only as the Midnight Spectre made its eerie appearance, materializing from the mists to haunt the living with its macabre delights and hideous secrets. Miles parked his aging sedan near a lonely, rusted sign that read, "Welcome to Granger Falls," its letters barely visible under layers of grime. His instincts, honed by the relentless pursuit of truth, told him that tonight might be the night the legends were proven real. With his recorder, camera, and a leather-bound notebook clutched tightly in his hand, he set off toward the flickering glow that emanated from the horizon. As he approached the grounds, the air grew unnaturally still. The carnival was set up in a sprawling, overgrown lot on the edge of a forgotten pasture. Enormous, dilapidated tents bore faded, peeling symbols, and the lights along the crooked lanes pulsed with an almost hypnotic rhythm. A sign suspended over the entrance, scrawled in elaborate cursive, read simply, "The Midnight Spectre. Enter if you dare." The moment Miles stepped through the warped, heavy canvas doorway, an oppressive aura descended. The carnival exuded a sense of ageless sorrow and malignant glee, as if every corner of the place retained echoes of past tragedies. Rusted carnival rides creaked in the moist wind, and dilapidated booths offered mysterious games whose prizes were shrouded in enigma. The environment itself seemed to breathe, a living testament to pain and loss. He wandered the grounds, documenting every detail with trembling fingers as he scribbled in his notebook. At intervals, an unseen voice whispered his name from the shadows, and the soft, intermittent laughter of unseen children mingled with the rustling leaves. A pallid mist clung close to the ground, blurring the edges of reality and dreams alike. Near a rundown carousel whose painted horses, once vibrant and full of life, now wore cracked visages, frozen in perpetual, haunting smiles, Miles encountered his first living soul in this unholy fair. A woman stood silently beside a booth displaying odd antiquated mirrors. She wore a faded costume reminiscent of carnival performers long past, her eyes shadowed with both nostalgia and terrible grief. Her name, as Miles would soon learn, was Sasha. "Are you lost?" she asked softly, her voice barely more than a secret shared between the damned and the night. The question was imbued with caution, as if her own life depended on keeping certain truths hidden. Miles regarded her carefully. "Not lost, just seeking answers," he replied. "I've heard tales about this carnival, that it appears only to those burdened by sorrow or those who need to confront it. Sasha's gaze flickered, and a haunted smile curved her lips. Stories. They say the Midnight Spectre was born out of despair. That in a terrible accident decades ago, a fire that claimed the lives of an entire troop, the very essence of that tragedy seeped into the carnival's soul. It seeks to capture new souls, to remind us that grief is eternal. Before Miles could inquire further, an echoing boom interrupted their conversation. It sounded as though an enormous drum had been struck in some distant, hidden chamber. The sound reverberated off the flimsy tents and warped wood, sending a shiver down his spine. Sasha's eyes widened and she reached out to steady him. "Come," she whispered urgently. "If you wish to know the truth, you must follow the sound." Together, they ventured deeper into the carnival's inner maze, a labyrinth of twisting passages marked by tattered banners and eerie, flickering lights. The air grew even heavier, saturated with the smell of burning wood and something rancid, like the decay of forgotten memories. Shadows of figures moved along the edges of his vision. At moments, faces formed, then dissolved on the surfaces of the crooked rides. At the heart of the carnival lay a grand marquee, adorned with faded, ornamental scrollwork and a crimson interior that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Miles and Sasha stepped inside cautiously, their footsteps muffled by a thick layer of dust and dried petals scattered over the floor. The space inside was cavernous, its high ceiling crisscrossed by exposed beams that cast angular shadows in the intermittent light of hanging, flickering bulbs. A hush fell over them as they reached the center of the room. There, perched on an ornate, time-worn podium, stood a man whose presence was both commanding and otherworldly. His clothes were immaculate yet archaic, a tailored suit that could have belonged to a different era, and his pale complexion was bathed in an unholy glow. His eyes, dark and unfathomable, held the weight of 1,000 sorrows. In one hand, he clutched a polished cane topped with a silver skull. In the other, he seemed to gather the very essence of the surrounding gloom. "Welcome, seekers of truth," he intoned, his voice resonant and melodious, yet edged with a sinister formality. "I am Mr. Blackwood, the ringmaster of this eternal carnival of lost souls. I see you carry burdens in your hearts, the grief of what once was and the fear of what may come." Miles's heart pounded in his ears as he struggled to suppress a shudder. "Mr. Blackwood," he began cautiously, "I'm here to understand, to uncover the truth about this place." The ringmaster smiled, a slow, predatory curve of his lips. "Truth, dear sir, is never free. It is paid for in memories and in sorrow. This carnival thrives on them, feeding on the weight of despair to keep its twisted existence alive." His gaze swept over the gathered crowd of ghostly onlookers, figures who appeared and vanished at the periphery, their forms translucent and their voices muted whispers of agony. Sasha stepped forward, her voice trembling with a mixture of defiance and despair. "You speak of curses and sorrow, but why do you force those who wander here to bear such pain? What is the purpose of this wretched spectacle?" Mr. Blackwood's eyes glittered in the dim light as he responded, "Every tragedy etches itself upon the heart of existence. We are the embodiment of every lost hope, every shattered dream that the world has forgotten. The carnival is a mirror, a reflection of the pain in every soul, and those who enter here, willingly or not, are bound to share in that reflection. The choice, however, is yours. You may flee into the comforting arms of ignorance, or you may learn our story and, in doing so, embrace the eternal sorrow we offer." A palpable silence fell as Miles absorbed the weight of his words. The ringmaster's declaration was both a threat and a lament, a confession of a dreadful fate that could ensnare those who dared look too deeply into the abyss of loss. Sensing that time was short before the carnival's dark magic would claim them entirely, Miles asked, "What must I do if I am to learn your truth?" Mr. Blackwood extended his hand slowly as if offering both an invitation and a final warning. "There is a book," he said quietly, "an ancient grimoire containing the ledger of pain that chronicles every soul lost to our carnival. It rests within the curiosity tent, a chamber of relics and memories assembled for those who dare seek the forbidden. There you will find not only our story, but also the price you must pay in exchange for knowing it all." With a final, enigmatic smile, Mr. Blackwood withdrew into the shadows as the lights dimmed further. The ringmaster's departure was accompanied by a gust of wind that stirred the tattered banners and sent the hairs on Miles's neck bristling with unease. Moved by both dread and the insatiable need for answers, Miles and Sasha navigated the twisted corridors until they reached a narrow tent, its canvas marred by strange symbols and the scent of old incense. Inside, on a pedestal draped in cobwebs and faded velvet, lay a large, leather-bound book. Its cover was embossed with cryptic runes that pulsed faintly in the half-light, as if the words contained within were alive. Miles's hand trembled as he opened the grimoire. Within, each page was filled with meticulous records of past tragedies, a litany of loss, horror, and despair. The ledger detailed not only the names of those who had once perished in the catastrophic fire that had doomed the original carnival troupe, but also accounts of subsequent souls lured to the Midnight Spectre. Every entry was written in frantic, ornate script, blood-red ink mingling with stains of age. There were confessions of grief, desperate pleas for redemption, and descriptions of inescapable madness that had driven some to vanish into the mists, leaving nothing but sorrow in their wake. Sasha's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she read aloud, "Their stories are eternal, bound to this carnival. To know them is to share their burden." Her voice was heavy with resignation and pity. "I once believed that by escaping here I could outrun my own grief, but it seems that sorrow is inescapable, even here, in a place where nightmares roam free." Miles closed the book slowly, his mind a maelstrom of horror and revelations. "This place is not merely a carnival," he murmured. "It is a purgatory for the lost. Every joy you experience out here is a fleeting illusion, a trap meant to drown you in despair." His words carried the weight of his own hidden sorrows, a past he had long buried beneath layers of cynicism. The lantern flickered suddenly, as if buffeted by an unseen force, and the canvas walls of the curiosity tent shuddered. In that moment, the oppressive energy of the carnival surged to life. Shadows convulsed, and spectral laughter bubbled up around them in a maddening, discordant symphony. A murmur of voices arose, low and mournful, as if the very ground beneath them wept. Outside, through the gaps in the tent's fabric, Miles could see figures, twisted reflections of human form, staggering along the curved pathways, their eyes vacant and their expressions etched with endless torment. The midnight air was punctuated with the sound of distant cries and the clatter of disembodied footsteps echoing in the gloom. Sasha grabbed Miles's arm. "We need to leave now," she pleaded. "The curse is tightening its grip. This carnival, it feeds on us, on our yearning for meaning in the midst of our despair." But Miles, now resolute and strangely emboldened by the terrible knowledge recorded in the grimoire, shook his head. "I cannot run away from what I now understand," he said, his voice steady despite the terror that churned within him. "I must tell their story. It is the only way to honor these lost souls and perhaps, one day, break the cycle of pain." At that moment, a final announcement rang out, a voice both sorrowful and terrifying. "The Book of Grief has been read, and the price is sealed," intoned Mr. Blackwood, reappearing at the center of the corridor. His eyes burned like coals as he spoke. "You have chosen to bear our legacy. From this moment on, you will never be free of our torment. May you carry our whispers in your heart until the end of your days." A cold dread washed over Miles, and for a long, frozen moment he felt as if invisible tendrils of despair were coiling around his very soul. Yet, as the echoes of Mr. Blackwood's words faded into the oppressive night, he knew there was no turning back. In that cursed carnival, where every sorrow was immortal and every shadow bled pain, his fate was irrevocably sealed. Together, Miles and Sasha stepped out of the curiosity tent into the clammy darkness. The carnival's twisted attractions loomed ominously, their garish lights now seeming like desperate beacons in a sea of grief. With every step he took along the crooked paths, Miles could almost feel the weight of the countless souls whose memories were etched into that accursed ledger, a burden he would carry with him, buried deep within his heart and inked forever onto the pages of his own story. As dawn's first weak glimmers threatened to break the endless night, Miles found himself alone at the periphery of the carnival. Sasha had vanished into the swirling mists, leaving him to face the legacy of pain as both a witness and a condemned chronicler. With trembling hands, he opened his notebook and began to write, determined that the cursed secrets of the Midnight Spectre and the souls it claimed would not fade away without remembrance. The carnival slowly receded into the swirling fog, its malevolent presence a distant, echoing nightmare. Yet Miles Turner knew that the sorrow of that night would haunt him for the rest of his days. a ceaseless reminder that the search for truth could exact a terrible and unyielding toll.
Story number 9.
A brittle wind swept across the barren moor as twilight gave way to a starless night. In the isolated hamlet of Coldwells, where the seasons seemed to have forgotten to change, time itself had grown heavy with secrets. Rumors abounded about a cursed clock tower that stood at the heart of the village, its presence a perpetual reminder of forgotten transgressions. They said that every midnight, its archaic gears and pendulums sang out a dirge, a lament that called to those whose souls were already burdened with sorrow. Few dared to linger near its base, and fewer still ventured inside the decrepit clockmaker's workshop tucked into a narrow lane nearby. Henry Marlowe, a determined journalist with a penchant for mysteries that defied logic, had arrived in Coldwells after a string of unsettling disappearances rattled the surrounding countryside. Whispers in neighboring towns spoke of a malignant influence emanating from the clock tower, a curse that ensnared not only the unfortunate souls who wandered too close, but also those who dared to seek out the dark history of the village. With his battered notebook, a digital recorder, and a heavy camera slung across his shoulder, Henry set out to expose the truth behind the legends. What he had not anticipated was the all-consuming chill that seeped into his bones and the oppressive atmosphere that transformed every creaking floorboard into a portent of despair. The journey to the workshop was a descent into another world. Narrow lanes twisted between crooked cottages with sagging roofs and shuttered windows that stared blankly into the night. At the far end of one such lane, a weathered wooden sign swayed in the wind, its letters barely legible, Alabaster's Clockworks. Henry paused before an ancient door, its surface scarred by time and neglect. He took a deep breath and pushed the door open. A musty, stale odor hit him, like the forgotten pages of an old book left to rot in a dark cellar. Inside, the workshop was lit only by the dying glow of a single oil lamp mounted on a chipped wall. Arranged meticulously on a worn oak workbench lay a collection of tools, tiny screwdrivers, delicate clock hands, and aged leather-bound ledgers that chronicled a lifetime of meticulous craftsmanship. At the far corner, behind a counter piled high with disassembled gears and springs, sat a man whose very presence seemed an echo of a bygone era. His gaunt face was partially hidden beneath a neatly pressed bowler hat, and his eyes, clear yet sorrowful, fixed on Henry with an intensity that made the young journalist's skin crawl. "Welcome, traveler," the old man croaked, his voice a low rasp that resonated with both weariness and a hidden gravity. "I am Mr. Alabaster, keeper of time here in Coldwells. It seems fate has brought you to us on this, a most cursed of nights." Henry's heart pounded. "I'm Henry Marlowe. I've come to investigate the happenings in this village, the disappearances, the legends of the clock tower. I need to know what has been plaguing Coldwells." Mr. Alabaster's thin lips curled into a somber smile. "The truth," he murmured, "is as tangled as the mechanisms of a clock long left to decay. You must understand that here, time does not simply measure moments. It binds them to our souls. And sometimes in the dead hours of the night, it calls out to reclaim what should have been lost." For hours, Henry questioned the reclusive clockmaker. By the intermittent light of the lamp, Alabaster recounted fragmented tales of the clock tower's unholy chimes at midnight, of villagers whose eyes had turned glassy with unspeakable terror, and of a ritual performed long ago, a desperate bargain made between Coldwell's founding family and forces beyond mortal ken. The clockmaker spoke in riddles, hinting that the curse was tied intimately to the ancient clock, its pendulum swinging not merely through time, but between realms. "Listen well," Mr. Alabaster whispered, lowering his voice as if afraid the darkness might be listening too. "On the night of the harvest moon, when the veil grows thin, the clock tower awakens with a sorrowful dirge. Some say that if one lingers too near the tower at the stroke of midnight, the gears will turn against you, capturing your spirit and binding it forever to our lost memories." Unsettled but determined, Henry pressed further. What exactly happened that night? Who made the pact, and what was exchanged? The old man's eyes glazed over with distant torment. "It was a night marked by despair and bloodshed. My master, one of the original founders of Coldwells, sought to escape the grip of mortality. In his hubris, he attempted to harness the very essence of time, seeking eternal life. The ritual demanded a sacrifice, a soul to anchor the bargain. When the clock struck midnight, a child, innocent and pure, was chosen to pay the price. And so began our endless lament, a curse that continues to draw the sorrowing and the lost into its embrace. A heavy silence fell over the room. Henry's mind raced with disbelief and horror. A child? He gasped. But that is monstrous. Mr. Alabaster merely shook his head, his expression etched with grief. Monstrous indeed, yet true, and when the pact was sealed with blood, the clock tower began its unyielding vigil. Since that terrible night, no soul who approaches it is ever entirely alone, nor can they ever escape its grasp. That night, unable to shake the image of a grieving child and the haunted eyes of the clockmaker, Henry resolved to see the clock tower for himself. With his resolve steeled by equal measures of dread and determination, he stepped out into the chilly night. The full moon, a wan and pitiful glow behind a curtain of clouds, cast twisted shadows that danced eerily over the cobblestones as he made his way to the village center. The clock tower loomed ahead, a monolithic structure of crumbling stone and iron, its face obscured by decades of grime and ivy. Each step toward it felt labored, as though 1,000 unseen hands were clutching at his heart. When he finally stood before its great arched doors, a slow and mournful chime began to echo, a sound that seemed to vibrate in his very soul. He pushed open the heavy door and ascended a narrow spiral staircase that wound around the interior like the coils of some ancient serpent. The higher he climbed, the heavier the air became, filled with the scent of rust and a faint, coppery tang reminiscent of old blood. At the top of the tower, he found himself in a vast, circular chamber dominated by the enormous clock mechanism. The great pendulum swung steadily, each tick a measured heartbeat that resonated with a terrible inevitability. As midnight approached, the gears of the ancient clock began to groan and shudder as if awakening from a long slumber. Henry's pulse quickened. He fumbled for his flashlight, its beam cutting through the gloom to reveal intricate carvings and faded inscriptions scrawled along the walls. Amid these cryptic symbols, one set of letters glowed dimly in the cold light. Remembrance. A sudden whisper, barely audible, drifted through the chamber, a voice that seemed to emanate from the very walls. Remember us, it breathed, as if mourning a loss long past. Henry's heart pounded, and he felt a presence close behind him. Spinning around, he saw nothing but the dark interior of the tower. Yet the whisper persisted, growing louder, a chorus of anguished pleas that filled the space between every tick of the clock. "I have come for the truth," Henry shouted into the darkness, his voice echoing hollowly. "Show me what happened." In response, the pendulum's swing became frantic, as though the mechanism struggled against an unseen force. The chamber's temperature plummeted, and Henry's breath came out in ragged puffs. A sudden flash of movement caught his peripheral vision, a fleeting glimpse of a small, tear-streaked face, half hidden in the shadows near the clock's inner workings. For an instant, the visage of a child materialized before him. Wide, terrified eyes, hollow with grief and longing. "Forgive us," the child whispered, its voice a plaintive echo lost in the winds of time. "I never meant to be the sacrifice." Henry felt his stomach twist in anguish. "Who are you?" he managed to ask, voice choked with sorrow and revulsion. "Amelia," the apparition replied softly. "I was chosen, though not willingly. I cried for help, but the darkness swallowed my pleas. Now I am trapped between the ticking of time and the silence of oblivion." The child's image flickered, and tears appeared to glisten where eyes should have shone, before dissolving into the gloom. At that moment, the great clock began to toll, a deep, resonant sound that reverberated through the tower and down into the very earth. Henry staggered, the overwhelming sorrow and terror threatening to drive him to collapse. In a desperate bid to regain his composure and uncover the mystery, he made his way over to an ancient console set against the wall. There, etched into the stone, was a diary bound in cracked leather and stained with what might have been blood. The pages trembled with age, but the ink was still legible, a meticulous account of events written by a man haunted by his own guilt. Henry opened the diary and began to read the anguished confessions of one Edgar Blackwell, a once prominent clockmaker and member of Coldwell's founding family. Edgar recounted the fateful night when his desperate attempt to defy death led him to conjure forces beyond his control. His words were rife with regret and terror as he described the ritual, the incantations spoken with fervor, the sacrificial circle traced in cold red earth, and the ultimate price, an innocent soul condemned to watch the relentless march of time, forever trapped between worlds. Heed this warning, the diary read in a final, fading entry. For every life taken to bargain with time, a fragment of our souls is bound to the clock, and when the final chime sounds, the debt must be repaid in sorrow. As the final chime echoed through the chamber, a force like a tidal wave of despair crashed over Henry. The diary slipped from his grasp, scattering its pages like leaves caught in a storm. At that moment, the full horror of Coldwell's curse unfurled before him. Spectral figures emerged from every shadow along the chamber's walls, their faces twisted in eternal misery and longing. They advanced slowly, a mournful procession of lives lost to ambition and grief. From amidst the spectral throng, Mr. Alabaster's voice reached him once more. "You have borne witness to our agony," the clockmaker intoned, appearing beside the ancient gears as if conjured by fate itself. "Now you must choose. Your soul can join ours in endless remembrance, or you may flee and risk spreading our curse beyond these walls. The truth, once spoken, binds all who hear it." Henry's mind reeled with the impossible choice laid before him. He could feel the ethereal tendrils of bells of sorrow to wrap themselves around his heart, threatening to claim him as one of the forgotten. Yet his resolve, owned by years of seeking truth amidst darkness, surged within him. "I will tell your story," he declared, voice trembling yet determined. "I will be the chronicler of this curse, so that the world may know the price of hubris and despair." A moment of eerie silence ensued, punctuated only by the relentless ticking of the cursed clock. Then, in a voice as soft as a dying sigh, Amelia's spirit spoke one last time. "Remember us, so that we might find peace." Her image faded into the darkness, leaving only the mournful echo of her plea. The spectral procession began to recede slowly, as though released from its eternal vigil by the promise of remembrance. Mr. Alabaster's eyes met Henry's, and in that look was a melancholy gratitude born of endless suffering. "You have carried our truth forward," he whispered, "but know that the sorrow of Coldwell's will forever walk with you. The curse is a weight that can never be fully escaped." Exhausted and forever changed, Henry descended the spiral staircase of the clock tower as the final chimes of midnight faded into silence. Outside, the village of Coldwell's lay shrouded in otherworldly mist, a place where time moved sluggishly and the boundaries between life and death blurred into perpetual twilight. The ancient clock tower, once a harbinger of doom, now stood silent, its secrets entrusted to the one man brave enough to face them. In the weeks that followed, Henry poured his heart and soul into a series of articles and a detailed account of the cursed chronicle he had discovered, interweaving the tragic history of Coldwell's with the spectral testimonies of those lost to time. His words carried the weight of sorrow and truth, resonating with readers who felt, in their own quiet moments, the inexorable pull of memories and regrets they could not escape. Yet, on quiet nights, as Henry sat alone in his study lit only by a single flickering lamp, he would sometimes feel a chill breeze brush against his neck, a gentle reminder of the child's plea, the anguished whispers of countless souls, and the perpetual toll of a curse that had found a new keeper in him. He knew that the price of truth was a burden that could never be repaid, and that the darkness of Coldwell's, though momentarily quieted, would always linger at the edge of his vision. In his final analysis, Henry realized that the true horror was not in the monstrous acts of a bygone era, but in the unyielding weight of memory, the relentless, inexorable pull of a past that demanded to be remembered, regardless of the cost. And so, every time the clock in his study chimed at midnight, he would pause, listening to its lament, and whisper a silent vow that he and all who heard his words would remember the sorrow of Coldwell so that those lost might finally be set free.
Story number 10.
A bitter wind swept across the churning sea as twilight surrendered to a night swollen with storm clouds. Blackwater Cove, a desolate inlet ringed by jagged cliffs and cloaked in perpetual fog, was renowned for a singular, haunted relic, the SS Erebos. Once a proud ocean liner carrying passengers in lavish comfort, the ship had succumbed to tragedy decades ago. Legend claimed that its loss was no accident, but the culmination of an unholy bargain, a ritual sacrifice wrought by those desperate to defy fate. Now its rusting hull lay abandoned amid treacherous reefs, its broken windows and twisted masts serving as ghostly reminders of souls forever lost at sea. Charlotte Avery, a marine archaeologist famed for her dogged pursuit of maritime mysteries, had long been drawn to the lore of the Erebos. Compelled by dreams of uncovering truth in the margins of myth, she assembled a small research vessel and set course for Blackwater Cove on an autumn evening when the tide of fate appeared unusually high. The vessel's engine roared as it cut through tempestuous waters, and Charlotte clutched her leather-bound journal and waterproof camera, determined to document every eerie detail. The closer she came to the cove, the more the atmosphere shifted from salty brine to something inexplicably oppressive, as if the very air were laced with despair. Dense fog curled around her boat as though trying to shroud the secrets of the deep, and distant mournful wails drifted on the wind, a sound that could have been mistaken for the moaning of lost souls. Under a bruised sky, the outline of the Erebos emerged like a phantom from the mist. Its silhouette was draped over the rocks, half submerged and contorted in a grotesque mimicry of life. Charlotte's heart hammered in her chest as she maneuvered her boat toward a narrow, rocky ledge that promised access to the vessel's decaying gangway. With trembling resolve, she donned a waterproof suit and prepared to step into a realm where history and horror intertwined. As Charlotte's boots splashed in cold, brackish water, she surveyed the ghastly wreck. The deck was strewn with debris, splintered wood, rusted metal, and remnants of what once had been elegant furnishings, now molded by time and decay. A dense silence reigned, punctuated only by the relentless patter of rain and the distant crashing of waves. The air carried a distinct coppery scent, as if the sea itself were steeped in blood. Aboard the wreck, Charlotte's flashlight revealed walls adorned with faded, cryptic symbols carved deep into the wood, the mark of a forgotten ritual. She recalled fragments of whispered accounts that the Erebos had been built by a secretive consortium of merchants who, stricken by misfortune and driven by greed, had turned to occult practices to secure their fortunes. In exchange for unearthly success, they were said to have sacrificed a precious soul during the ship's christening. Their dark bargain, the locals murmured, had condemned the vessel and its passengers to an endless purgatory, forever doomed to wander the watery abyss. "Hello?" Charlotte called out, her voice echoing into the void as she advanced along the creaking gangway. Her words were swallowed by the oppressive gloom. For several heartbeats, only the sound of her own ragged breaths filled the silence. Then, from the darkened corridor leading below deck came a faint, melodic murmur, a dissonant lullaby that mingled with the sound of dripping water. Compelled by equal parts terror and fascination, Charlotte inched toward the source of the sound. The passageway was narrow and claustrophobic, its walls slick with salt and decay. Each step she took seemed to awaken something ancient in the bowels of the ship. At the end of the corridor, an arched doorway beckoned with a ghostly blue glow. Inside lay a cavernous cabin, its high ceiling festooned with broken chandeliers whose crystals sparkled with the reflection of the eerie light. In the center of the room was a massive, overturned table, and scattered about were the remnants of a lavish feast, a decayed roast, tarnished silverware, and half-burned candles that still smoldered with unsteady flames. At the far end of the cabin, a heavy mirror hung askew on the wall. Its surface, though marred by cracks, revealed a strange distortion. Behind Charlotte, she could make out a figure, a small child with eyes as sorrowful as the deep sea, staring out with a gaze that pierced the veil of life and death. "Leave." The spectral voice whispered, barely audible, carrying an ancient grief that spoke of betrayal and despair. Charlotte spun around. For a moment, the cabin was empty, except for the echo of her own frantic heartbeat. But then, the chill of an unseen presence pressed against her, and she felt a hand, cold, insubstantial, brush against her shoulder. In a rush of frenzied whispers that overlapped as if spoken by a dozen voices, the child's visage flickered through the dim light. "Amelia," the voice repeated softly, "I never wanted this." Charlotte's mind reeled with conflicting emotions, a desperate longing to help, an instinctive terror that warned her against interference, and a singular drive to document everything. "Who are you?" she stammered, forcing herself to speak despite the ice that threatened to seize her heart. "What happened here?" A silvery glow began to coalesce in the mirror as the figure of the child grew clearer. It was Amelia, a name that seemed to resonate with the melancholy toll of a distant bell. Her eyes, luminous and forlorn, filled with a sorrow that seemed to bridge centuries. I was the sacrifice, Amelia murmured in a voice that blended innocence with unimaginable despair. They promised us life eternal, but only condemned us to unending anguish on the waves. Every soul aboard the Erebos is trapped in limbo, forced to replay that dreadful night, adrift between hope and oblivion. Before Charlotte could protest or retreat, a heavy groan reverberated through the ship. The floor beneath her seemed to tremble as though some colossal weight shifted in the depths below. From the shadows at the far end of the cabin emerged another presence, a tall, gaunt figure draped in tattered finery. His eyes burned with a grim intensity, and his voice was laden with a bitter mixture of defiance and regret. "You should not have come, seeker," the figure intoned, his words resonant and firm. "I am Captain Thorn, the master of this accursed vessel. In our quest to cheat death, we forged a pact with powers beyond mortal ken. The price was steep, a child's life, the innocence of souls sacrificed for promises that turned to ash. And now all who trespass upon the Erebos are doomed to share our fate." Captain Thorn's spectral figure moved slowly toward Charlotte, his presence chilling the very air around her. "Your intrusion rouses the old curse," he declared. "The clock of our doom never stops ticking. With every moment you linger here, your spirit grows entangled in our sorrow. It is not enough to merely witness our plight. You must bear it, become a part of it, until the sea claims you as one of its own." "Please," Charlotte whispered, her voice quivering. "I only wish to help you find peace, to reveal what truly happened, so that your story is not lost to time." The captain's gaze softened for the briefest of moments, as if memories of a kinder past flickered behind his hollow eyes. "Help?" he echoed softly. "There is no help to be had for those who were robbed of their mortal fate. Our torment is eternal, our existence a ceaseless loop of grief and regret." Yet something in Charlotte's determined expression, in the steadfast clench of her fists and the unwavering spark of curiosity in her eyes, stirred a faint glimmer of possibility. "I will record your story," she vowed, voice trembling but resolute. "I will tell the world what happened, the truth about the Erebos, about the dreadful night when the bargain was sealed. Perhaps through remembrance you may find a path to release." A long, haunted silence followed as the figures of Amelia and Captain Thorn regarded her with sorrowful resignation. Then, with a voice that quavered like the final toll of a bell, Amelia whispered, "Remember us. Let our tragedy be known." Captain Thorn inclined his head, the weight of countless lost years etched in the lines of his spectral face. "Your words will carry the burden of our souls," he said gravely. "But be warned, Charlotte Avery, once you have absorbed this sorrow, it may never leave you. The curse of the Erebos is a mantle that will shadow every step you take on land, as it did on the tumultuous seas." At that pronouncement, the ship trembled as if in mourning. The sound of distant, mournful music, a discordant melody played by unseen instruments, rose and fell in the drafty corridors of the vessel. With trembling hands, Charlotte retrieved her waterproof journal and began to write feverishly by the wavering light of her torch. Every detail, the haunted corridors, the disembodied voices, the spectral figures of Amelia and Captain Thorn, was recorded with a mix of awe and deep dread. The hours stretched into what felt like an eternity. Storm winds battered the hull, and the salty sea spray mingled with tears that traced painful paths down Charlotte's cheeks. In that moment, she realized that the Erebos was not merely a ship lost to time, but a repository of sorrow, a living mausoleum of broken promises and eternal regret. When at last she emerged back onto the rocky shore, the first hints of dawn broke through the dissipating fog. The wreck of the Erebos lay silent, its eerie lights extinguished, its cursed energies momentarily abated. But as Charlotte stood shivering on the desolate beach, she sensed that the true horror had only just begun. The haunting melody of the ship, the sorrowful pleas of its doomed passengers, and the weight of an ancient curse had seeped into her very soul. In the following months, Charlotte transformed her ordeal into a detailed chronicle, a manuscript interwoven with despair, truth, and bitter beauty. Her account of the Erebos and its tragic legacy rippled through academic circles and ghostly folklore alike, captivating those who found solace in the macabre and warnings in its sorrowful verses. Yet every night, as the darkness stretched and the silent echoes of the sea grew palpable, Charlotte would awake to a faint, desperate lullaby, a reminder of a child's lament and the eternal mourning of a captain whose fate was sealed by ambition and dread. And so it was that Charlotte Avery's life became forever intertwined with the cursed past of the SS Erebos. Every midnight when the moon ascended beyond the clouds, she could almost hear the ship's mournful chime in the depths of her memory, a perpetual requiem for souls sacrificed in the name of false promises. Though she had set out to reveal the truth, she found that some horrors once witnessed could never be fully left behind.